The gunshot echoed through the Montana mansion as Isabel Harrington stood frozen, her wedding dress splattered with blood that wasn't hers. She'd traveled 3,000 miles to marry a poor farmer, only to discover her husband-to-be owned half the territory, and someone wanted him dead. The letter that brought her here was a lie. The fortune was built on graves, and the woman pointing the smoking gun at her now smiled like the devil herself. Welcome to Cedar Ridge, where mail-order brides either became queens or corpses. If you're watching from your city tonight, drop a comment below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let me tell you how a desperate Boston seamstress uncovered the most dangerous secret in the American West. The train wheels screeched against frost-covered rails as it pulled into Cedar Ridge Station, Montana territory, on a bitter February morning in 1888. Isabel Harrington pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she searched the platform for a man she'd never met, a man whose letters had promised her salvation from the suffocating poverty of Boston's tenements. "Cedar Ridge, last stop," the conductor bellowed, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter of passengers gathering their belongings. Isabel's fingers trembled as she smoothed her best dress, a faded blue wool that had seen better days but was carefully mended and pressed for this moment. In her worn leather satchel, she carried everything she owned: 2 spare dresses, a Bible her mother had given her before consumption took her, a small sewing kit, and most importantly, a bundle of letters tied with string. Letters from Jonathan Mercer, the man who would become her husband. "You getting off here, miss?" A woman across the aisle leaned forward, her eyes sharp with curiosity. She was expensively dressed, with kid gloves and a fur collar that spoke of wealth Isabel had only glimpsed through shop windows. "Yes," Isabel replied, lifting her chin despite the flutter of fear in her stomach. "I'm meeting my fiancé." The woman's expression shifted to something Isabel couldn't quite read. Pity, perhaps, or warning. "First time in Montana." "First time west of Philadelphia," Isabel admitted. "Well then," the woman murmured, gathering her own bags. "I hope you know what you're walking into." Before Isabel could ask what she meant, the woman swept down the aisle and disappeared into the crowd of disembarking passengers. Isabel followed, her boots clicking on the metal steps as she descended onto the platform. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Boston winters were harsh, but this was different. A dry, penetrating cold that seemed to reach through her coat and into her very bones. She pulled her shawl tighter and scanned the crowd. "Miss Harrington?" She turned to find a man standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand despite the cold. He was tall, perhaps 35, with weathered features that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His clothes were simple but well made, certainly not the patched overalls she'd expected of a struggling farmer. "Mr. Mercer?" Her voice came out smaller than intended. He nodded, a slight smile softening his austere features. "Jonathan, please." He stepped forward, reaching for her satchel. "May I?" She let him take it, studying him as he did. His hands were calloused, yes, but his nails were clean, carefully trimmed. His boots were polished. This was not the picture of poverty his letters had painted. "The wagon's this way," he said, gesturing toward the street. "It's a fair ride to the ranch. I've got blankets and a foot warmer. Didn't want you catching cold your first day." As they walked, Isabel noticed how people stepped aside for Jonathan, men tipping their hats, women nodding respectfully. A few cast curious glances her way, some sympathetic, others calculating. "Mr. Mercer!" a voice called out. A portly man in a banker's suit hurried toward them, slightly out of breath. "Heard you were coming to town today." "Not now, Hendricks," Jonathan said, his tone still polite but firm. "I'm seeing to Miss Harrington." The banker's eyes flicked to Isabel, and something like surprise crossed his face. Of course. Another time, then." He tipped his hat to Isabel. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge, miss. I'm sure you'll find it educational." As the banker retreated, Isabel caught Jonathan's jaw tightening. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Just business," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing for you to worry about." They reached a wagon, not the simple farm cart Isabel had imagined, but a well-appointed carriage with glass windows and brass fittings. 2 matched black horses stood in the traces, their breath steaming in the cold air. This is yours. Isabel couldn't hide her surprise. Jonathan paused in helping her up. Did I not mention the wagon in my letters? You said you had simple means. That times were hard. Times are hard for everyone out here, he said carefully, settling her on the padded bench and tucking a thick buffalo robe around her legs. The drought last summer, the winter that followed, we've all had to tighten our belts. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Isabel studied his profile. There was something he wasn't telling her. She could feel it in the careful way he chose his words, see it in the tension around his eyes. How long have you been ranching here? She asked as they pulled away from the station. My family's been on this land for 20 years, he replied. My father came out after the war, claimed the homestead. I took over when he passed 5 winters ago. And your mother? Died when I was 12. Fever took her. I'm sorry. He glanced at her, seeming surprised by the genuine sympathy in her voice. It was a long time ago. They rode in silence for a while, the town giving way to open prairie. The landscape was breathtaking in its severity, rolling hills covered in snow, distant mountains like blue shadows against the sky, and a sense of space that made Isabel feel both free and terrifyingly small. It's beautiful, she said softly. It's harsh, Jonathan corrected. Beautiful, yes, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. The land out here, it takes more than it gives. Then why stay? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, because once it's in your blood, you can't leave. Even when you should. Especially when you should. The cryptic response sent a shiver down Isabel's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. They'd been riding for perhaps an hour when another wagon appeared on the horizon, moving fast toward them. Jonathan's hands tightened on the reins. Who is that? Isabel asked. Trouble, Jonathan muttered, then louder. Ezra Dalton. He owns the spread next to mine. The wagon pulled alongside them, forcing Jonathan to stop. The man driving was younger than Jonathan, perhaps 30, with coal-black hair and eyes like chips of flint. He was handsome in a dangerous way, the kind of man Isabel's mother had warned her about. Well, well, Dalton said, his gaze sliding from Jonathan to Isabel with undisguised interest. So the rumors are true. You actually went and got yourself another mail-order bride. Another? Isabel looked at Jonathan, whose face had gone stone still. Didn't tell her about Margaret, did you? Dalton's smile was sharp as a blade. Can't say I blame you. Not exactly a story to inspire confidence. Move along, Dalton, Jonathan said quietly. This doesn't concern you. Everything that happens on this range concerns me, Dalton replied, especially when it involves innocent young women who don't know what they're walking into. He tipped his hat to Isabel. Miss, if you ever need help, any kind of help, my ranch is 10 miles due east. White gatepost, can't miss it. She won't be needing your help, Jonathan said, his voice carrying a warning. Dalton laughed, a sound without humor. That's what Margaret thought, too. He snapped his reins. Remember what I said, miss. 10 miles due east. After he was gone, Isabel sat rigid beside Jonathan, her mind racing. Who was Margaret? Jonathan didn't answer immediately, focusing on guiding the horses around a patch of rough ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. A woman I corresponded with last year, like you. What happened to her? She left. Why? She decided ranch life wasn't for her. Isabel wanted to press further, but something in his tone warned her off. Still, Dalton's words echoed in her mind. Another mail-order bride. How many had there been? And why had they all left? The sun was beginning its descent when they crested a hill and Jonathan pulled the horses to a stop. There, he said simply. Home. Isabel's breath caught. Below them, nestled in a valley with a stream running through it, was not the modest homestead she'd expected, but a sprawling estate. The main house was 3 stories of timber and stone, with wings extending from either side. Barns, stables, and outbuildings dotted the landscape. Fenced pastures stretched as far as she could see, and even in winter she could make out hundreds of cattle. This is yours, she whispered. Ours, Jonathan corrected. If you'll still have me. Isabel turned to stare at him. You lied to me. I was selective with the truth. Why? He sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. Would you have come if you knew? A woman from Boston answering an advertisement to marry a wealthy rancher in Montana. You would have thought it was some kind of scheme, or worse, you would have come for the wrong reasons. So you tested me? I wanted someone who would come for the life, not the money. Someone who could handle the isolation, the hard work, he paused, choosing his words carefully, the challenges. Like whatever happened to Margaret? His jaw tightened. We should get to the house. It'll be dark soon, and Aunt Catherine will be waiting. As they descended toward the estate, Isabel's mind whirled. She'd prepared herself for poverty, for struggle, for the hard life of a farmer's wife. She hadn't prepared for this, wealth that brought its own dangers, secrets that seemed to lurk in every shadow, and a husband-to-be who was clearly more than he appeared. The house loomed larger as they approached, and Isabel could see figures moving behind lit windows. Staff, she realized. He had staff. How many people work for you? She asked. About 30, depending on the season. More during Roundup. And you couldn't mention this in your letters? Would you have believed me if I had? She had to admit he had a point, a wealthy rancher advertising for a bride through the matrimonial papers. It would have seemed like a trap. They pulled up to the main entrance, where a severe-looking woman in black stood waiting. She was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it stretched her features. Her eyes, the same green as Jonathan's, assessed Isabel with the intensity of a buyer examining livestock. Aunt Catherine, Jonathan said as he helped Isabel down. This is Miss Isabel Harrington. So I see, Catherine replied, her tone giving away nothing. Another one. Catherine, Jonathan warned. She ignored him, stepping forward to circle Isabel slowly. Can you read? Yes, ma'am. Write? Yes. Cook? Sew? Manage household accounts? All of those things. Catherine stopped in front of her. And what makes you think you'll last longer than the others? I didn't know there were others until an hour ago, Isabel replied, finding her spine. But I've survived 23 years in Boston's poorest district, watched my mother die of consumption, and worked 16-hour days in a textile factory. I doubt anything in Montana could be worse than that. Catherine's lips twitched in what might have been approval. We'll see. She turned to Jonathan. Marcus Whitfield's been by twice today. Says it's urgent. Jonathan's expression darkened. What does he want now? The same thing he always wants, Catherine replied. Everything. She swept back into the house, leaving Isabel and Jonathan standing in the gathering dusk. Who is Marcus Whitfield? Isabel asked. Someone you'll meet soon enough, Jonathan said wearily. Come, let's get you settled. Tomorrow will be soon enough for explanations. But as they entered the house, Isabel caught sight of a portrait hanging in the entrance hall. A young woman with golden hair and laughing eyes, wearing a blue dress very much like Isabel's own. Who is that? She asked. Jonathan followed her gaze and his face closed off entirely. No one, he said. Not anymore. A maid appeared, young, nervous-looking, with red-rimmed eyes as if she'd been crying. Shall I show Miss Harrington to her room, sir? Yes. Thank you, Alice. As Isabel followed the maid up the grand staircase, she looked back to see Jonathan still standing before the portrait, his hands clenched at his sides. In that moment, she realized she'd traded one kind of danger for another. In Boston, the threat had been poverty, disease, desperation. Here, it was something else entirely. Secrets that lived in the walls, dangers that wore expensive clothes, and a past that might not stay buried. Alice led her down a long hallway lined with closed doors. Your room, miss, she said, opening one at the far end. Mr. Mercer thought you'd like the view of the mountains. The room was beautiful, far grander than anywhere Isabel had ever slept. A four-poster bed dominated the space, with a writing desk by the window and a wardrobe that could hold 20 times the clothes she owned. Alice, Isabel said as the girl turned to go, the woman in the portrait downstairs. Alice's face went white. I can't. Please. The maid glanced nervously at the door, then whispered, That was Miss Margaret, miss, the one who came before you. Mr. Mercer said she left because she didn't like ranch life. Alice's eyes filled with tears. Is that what he said? She shook her head. Miss Margaret didn't leave, miss. She disappeared. One night she was here. The next morning her bed hadn't been slept in and all her things were still in her room. That was 6 months ago. Isabel's blood ran cold. What do you think happened to her? I don't know, miss. But I heard her arguing with someone the night she vanished, angry voices coming from the study. Then nothing. Alice grabbed Isabel's hand suddenly, urgently. Be careful, miss. This house, it's not what it seems. None of them are what they seem. Before Isabel could ask more, Alice fled, leaving her alone in the elegant room that suddenly felt more like a trap than a sanctuary. Isabel moved to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. Somewhere out there, a woman named Margaret had vanished. Below her, in this grand house, people moved through rooms full of secrets. And tomorrow she was supposed to marry a man who had lied to her from the very beginning. She thought of Dalton's words, "If you ever need help." She thought of Catherine's cold assessment. She thought of Jonathan's face when he looked at Margaret's portrait. In Boston, she'd known exactly what threatened her: hunger, cold, disease. The dangers were visible, tangible, predictable. Here, in this beautiful, terrible place, she couldn't even name what she should fear. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. It was Jonathan. He stood in the doorway, seeming uncertain whether to enter. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in." Alice was very helpful, Isabel said carefully. "Good." He paused. "Isabel, I know this isn't what you expected. I know you must have questions." "Just one," she interrupted. "If we marry tomorrow, am I going to end up like Margaret?" His face went ashen. "What did Alice tell you?" "Enough!" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Margaret's disappearance had nothing to do with our engagement." Then what did it have to do with? Things that happened before she arrived. Old grievances, old claims. He moved to the window, standing beside her but not touching. My father wasn't always scrupulous in how he acquired land. There are people who believe this ranch should belong to them. People like Dalton, among others. He turned to face her. "Isabel, I won't force you to go through with this. If you want to leave, I'll arrange passage back to Boston tomorrow. But if I stay, then you need to know that being my wife means more than just managing a household. It means standing against those who would take what we have. It means being strong enough to face whatever comes. And if I'm not strong enough," he studied her for a long moment, "something tells me you are. The question is whether you want to be." After he left, Isabel sat on the bed, her mind racing. She could leave tomorrow, go back to Boston and its certain poverty. Or she could stay and face whatever unknown dangers lurked in this beautiful, terrible place. She thought of her mother dying in a tenement room that smelled of sickness and despair. She thought of the factory where she'd worked, her fingers bleeding from the endless sewing, her lungs filling with cotton dust. Then she thought of Margaret's portrait, those laughing eyes that would never laugh again. She moved to the writing desk, where paper and ink had been thoughtfully provided. By candlelight, she began to write. "Dear Diary, I have arrived in Montana to find that nothing is as I expected. The man I am to marry is not poor, but wealthy, not simple, but complex, not safe, but dangerous. I am surrounded by mysteries and threats I don't understand. And yet," she paused, pen hovering over paper, "and yet I cannot bring myself to leave. Perhaps it is foolishness. Perhaps it is courage. Perhaps there is no difference between the two. Tomorrow I will either marry Jonathan Mercer or flee this place. Tonight, I will try to discover which choice leads to salvation and which to doom." A sound in the hallway made her look up. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, stopped outside her door. She held her breath, waiting for a knock that didn't come. After a moment, the footsteps continued on. She rose and moved to the door, pressing her ear against it. Voices drifted from somewhere below, Jonathan's and another man's, raised in anger. "You can't keep doing this," the stranger's voice insisted. How many more women are you going to bring here? How many more are going to... Enough! Jonathan's voice cut through. What happened to Margaret was not my fault. Wasn't it? You knew the danger. You knew what father had done, what enemies he'd made. And still you brought her here. Father? Isabel realized this must be another relative, a brother, perhaps. And what would you have me do, Thomas? Live alone forever? Let the ranch die with me? Better that than another woman's blood on our hands. The voices faded as the men moved away, but their words echoed in Isabel's mind. Blood on our hands. Another woman's blood. She returned to her letter, adding, I have just overheard a conversation that chills me to the bone. It seems Margaret's fate was no accident, no simple disappearance. There's blood involved, and danger, and a family secret that may cost me my life if I stay. Another knock at the door made her quickly hide the letter. Yes? It was Alice again, carrying a tray. Supper, miss. Mrs. Catherine thought you might prefer to eat in your room tonight. Thank you. Isabel took the tray, noting the fine china, the silver cutlery. Even the simple meal of stew and bread was elegantly presented. Alice, wait. The girl paused at the door. The man who was arguing with Mr. Mercer just now, who was that? That would be Mr.
Thomas? Miss? Mr. Jonathan's younger brother. He manages the northern range. They seemed upset. Alice bit her lip. The brothers don't always see eye to eye, miss. Especially about the marriages. Marriages? Plural? Alice's eyes widened as she realized what she'd said. I should go, miss. Alice, please. How many women came before Margaret? The maid glanced nervously at the door, then whispered, 2 others, miss. Before my time, but the old staff talk. First was Sarah, 4 years ago. She lasted 3 months before she ran off, or so they say. Then Emma, 2 years ago. She died. How? Fever, they said. But Cook says she was healthy as a horse one day and dead the next. Alice grabbed the doorknob. I've said too much. Please, miss, don't tell anyone I spoke of this. After Alice fled, Isabel could barely touch her supper. 3 women before her. 1 fled, 1 dead, 1 vanished. And she was supposed to marry Jonathan tomorrow. She moved back to the window, staring out at the darkness. In the distance, she could see lights, perhaps from Dalton's ranch, perhaps from somewhere else. Were they warnings or invitations? A movement in the yard below caught her eye. A figure in a dark cloak was moving toward the stables, keeping to the shadows. The figure paused, looking up at her window, and for a moment the hood fell back. It was Catherine. Their eyes met across the distance, and Catherine smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made Isabel step back from the window. When she looked again, the older woman was gone. Isabel began to pace the room, her mind working furiously. She was trapped in a house full of secrets, engaged to a man who had lied to her, surrounded by people who might mean her harm. She thought of the factory in Boston, of 16-hour days and bleeding fingers. That had been a different kind of prison, but a prison nonetheless. At least here, she thought grimly, the cage was gilded. A soft scratching at the door interrupted her thoughts. Not a knock. Something else. She moved closer, listening. The scratching came again, followed by a whisper. Miss Harrington? Please, I need to speak with you. It was a woman's voice, but not Alice's. Isabel hesitated, then opened the door a crack. A woman stood in the hallway, perhaps 40, well-dressed, but with the bearing of a servant. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously. I'm Mrs. Holloway, she whispered. The housekeeper. May I come in? Isabel let her enter, closing the door quickly behind her. Forgive the intrusion, miss, but I couldn't let another night pass without warning you. Warning me about what? Mrs. Holloway wrung her hands. About the truth of this place. About what really happened to the others. Tell me. The housekeeper moved to the window, checking that it was latched. It starts with old Mr. Mercer, Jonathan and Thomas's father. He built this empire, but not honestly. Land grabbed from homesteaders, water rights stolen, rival ranchers driven out, or worse. Worse? Some say he killed a man named Peterson who wouldn't sell. Made it look like Indians did it.
Peterson's son swore vengeance, but nothing was ever proved. And the women? Mrs. Holloway's face crumpled. Sarah, the first one. She found documents in old Mr. Mercer's study, proof of his crimes. She threatened to go to the authorities if Jonathan didn't let her leave with a substantial payment. One night, she was gone. Jonathan said she'd run off, but her things were gone too. Packed neat and tidy. What woman running for her life packs everything neat and tidy? Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. And Emma? Emma was different. Sweet girl, genuinely loved Jonathan, and he loved her. But she got sick, really sick, not like what they told people. She was with child, you see, and something went wrong. Catherine insisted on treating herself, wouldn't let anyone send for the doctor. By the time Jonathan overrode her, it was too late. And Margaret? Mrs. Holloway's voice dropped even lower. Margaret was the smartest of them all, too smart. She figured out something, I don't know what, but she was excited about it, said she'd found the key to everything. The next morning, she was gone. Alice said she heard arguing that night. We all did. Margaret and someone else in the study. But in the morning, Jonathan said she'd left in the night, taken the early stage to Billings. But you don't believe that. Her wedding dress was still hanging in the wardrobe, miss. The dress she'd spent weeks embroidering by hand. What woman leaves behind her wedding dress? Isabel moved to her own wardrobe where her simple wedding dress, borrowed from a friend in Boston, hung waiting for tomorrow. What should I do? Mrs. Holloway grasped her hands. Leave. Tonight if you can. Tomorrow morning at the latest. Don't marry him, miss. Don't become another ghost in this house. But where would I go? I have no money, no connections here. Better to be poor and alive than rich and buried, miss. After Mrs. Holloway left, Isabel sat in the darkness, weighing her options. She could try to leave tonight, but how? She didn't know the land, had no horse, no money for the stage. She could wait until morning, refuse the marriage, demand to be taken back to town. But would Jonathan let her go? Or she could go through with the marriage and hope to survive longer than her predecessors. She lit a candle and returned to her letter. It is near midnight now, and I have learned the full horror of my situation. 3 women came before me to marry Jonathan Mercer. None survived the attempt. Tomorrow, I am to become the 4th. I am frightened, more frightened than I have ever been, yet something in me refuses to run. Perhaps it is pride. Perhaps it is curiosity. Perhaps it is simply that I am tired of running from poverty and am willing to face a different kind of danger. If something happens to me, let this record show that Isabel Harrington knew the risks and chose to stay. God help me, I chose to stay. She was sealing the letter when she heard it. Music, faint but distinct, drifting through the walls. A piano, playing a melody she didn't recognize. It was beautiful and sad, like a lament for the dead. Following the sound, she crept from her room and down the hallway. The music grew louder as she descended the stairs, careful to avoid the creaking steps Alice had warned her about. It was coming from behind a door at the far end of the main hall. She peered through the keyhole and gasped. Jonathan sat at a grand piano, his fingers moving across the keys with surprising skill. But it was what surrounded him that made Isabel's blood run cold. The walls were covered with portraits. Not just Margaret, but 2 other women as well. Sarah, she assumed, and Emma, 3 dead brides watching over their would-be husband as he played their requiem. As she watched, Jonathan stopped playing and spoke to the portraits. I'm sorry, he said, his voice broken. I'm so sorry. But I have to try again. The ranch needs an heir. The legacy must continue. You understand, don't you? He started playing again, and Isabel backed away from the door, her heart pounding. She understood now. Jonathan wasn't a murderer. He was something perhaps worse. A man so desperate to preserve his father's empire that he would keep sacrificing women to whatever danger haunted this place, hoping that eventually one would survive. She was about to return to her room when a hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her into the shadows. Don't scream, a voice hissed in her ear. I'm trying to help you. The hand released her, and she spun to find Thomas Mercer standing there. He was younger than Jonathan, perhaps 30, with the same green eyes but a kinder face. You're Thomas, she whispered. And you're in terrible danger, he replied. Come with me, quickly. He led her through a door she hadn't noticed, down a narrow servant's stair, and into what appeared to be a cellar. Only when he'd lit a lamp and closed the door behind them did he speak again. "You seem smarter than the others," he said. "Smart enough to be suspicious, at least." "Smart enough to know I should be terrified," Isabel replied. "Good. Fear might keep you alive." He moved to a wine rack and pulled out a bottle, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. "I've been collecting evidence for years, trying to understand what's really happening here." He pulled out a leather journal and handed it to her. "This was Margaret's. I found it hidden in the stable after she disappeared." Isabel opened it, reading Margaret's careful script. "I have discovered the truth at last. The danger is not Jonathan, though he is complicit in his blindness. It is Catherine. She cannot bear the thought of another woman taking her place as mistress of this house. She killed Emma with poison disguised as medicine. She drove Sarah away with threats and fear. And now she plans the same for me." Isabel looked up at Thomas. "Catherine?" He nodded grimly. "My dear aunt. She's ruled this place since my mother died. The thought of Jonathan bringing in a wife, someone who would outrank her, drives her to madness. But why doesn't Jonathan see this? Because she's clever. Because she raised us after Mother died. Because he can't believe someone he loves could be capable of such evil." Thomas took the journal back. Margaret was going to expose her. That's why she had to disappear completely, not just die or run away, but vanish without a trace. What happened to her? Thomas's face was grave. "I think she's buried somewhere on the property. But I can't prove it without revealing that I know the truth, and if Catherine realizes I'm onto her, she'll kill you too. Or make it look like an accident. She's very good at that." Isabel sank onto a crate, overwhelmed. "What should I do?" "Leave," Thomas said immediately. "I'll help you. I can get you to Dalton's ranch. Despite his rivalry with Jonathan, he's an honorable man. He'll see you safely to the railway. And if I stay—" Thomas stared at her. "Why would you even consider that?" Isabel thought of the factory, of her mother's death, of the endless gray poverty of Boston. "Because I'm tired of running. Because maybe, just maybe, if I know the danger, I can avoid it." The others knew the danger too, eventually. But they didn't have an ally. They didn't have you. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both." She stood. "If I go through with the marriage tomorrow, will you help me?" "Against my own aunt?" "For your brother. For this ranch. For justice for those 3 women." Thomas studied her face in the lamplight. "You remind me of Emma," he said finally. "She had that same fierce determination. It got her killed." "Or maybe Catherine killed her because she recognized a threat," Isabel countered. "Someone who couldn't be scared away or controlled. And you think you're different. I think I have nothing to lose. That makes me dangerous in a way those other women weren't." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. If you're determined to stay, I'll help you, but we need rules. First, never eat or drink anything Catherine gives you directly. Second, never be alone with her. Third, if I tell you to run, you run. No questions, no hesitation." "Agreed." "There's more," Thomas said, pulling out another document. "This arrived last week. It was a letter from a Pinkerton detective agency, addressed to Margaret Foster, except Margaret's last name had been Whitfield, according to Jonathan." "She was a detective?" Isabel breathed. "Hired by Marcus Whitfield to investigate the family. He believes my father killed his brother 20 years ago and has been trying to prove it ever since. When he heard Jonathan was advertising for a bride, he sent Margaret undercover. Then Whitfield knows she's missing." "Yes, and he's been pressuring Jonathan ever since. He wants the ranch, Isabel. He believes it rightfully belongs to him. And if he can prove the Mercers were involved in Margaret's disappearance, he'll have everything he needs to take it." "Exactly." They heard footsteps overhead, and Thomas quickly extinguished the lamp. In the darkness, they waited until the footsteps faded. "I should get you back to your room," Thomas whispered. "It wouldn't do for anyone to find us together." As they crept back through the house, Isabel's mind raced. She was caught in a web of secrets, lies, and old crimes. Catherine wanted her dead. Whitfield wanted the ranch. Jonathan wanted an heir. Thomas wanted justice. And she... What did she want? Survival, she decided. First and foremost, survival. At her door, Thomas paused. Are you sure about this? No, she admitted, but I'm going to do it anyway. Then God help you, he said. God help us both. Alone in her room, Isabel didn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the sun rise over the Montana mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks gold and pink. It was beautiful enough to make her heart ache. Alice arrived early with hot water and breakfast. It's your wedding day, miss, she said, trying to sound cheerful. Yes, Isabel replied. It is. As Alice helped her dress, Isabel noticed the girl's hands were trembling. What's wrong? Nothing, miss. It's just, Mrs. Catherine was asking about you, what you'd said, who you'd talked to. What did you tell her? Nothing, miss. I swear. Isabel caught the girl's hands. Alice, after today I'll be mistress of this house. That means you'll answer to me, not Catherine. Do you understand? Hope flickered in Alice's eyes. Yes, miss. Good. Now I need you to do something for me. Isabel pulled out the letter she'd written the night before. If anything happens to me, anything at all, I want you to send this to the newspaper in Billings. Can you do that? Alice took the letter with trembling fingers. You know, don't you? About the others? I know enough. Then why are you staying? Isabel looked at herself in the mirror, a pale young woman in a borrowed dress, about to marry a man she'd known for less than a day, in a house where 3 women had already died. Because someone needs to stop this, she said, and apparently that someone is me. The wedding was to be small, just family and a few close neighbors, including, to Isabel's dismay, both Ezra Dalton and Marcus Whitfield. She stood in the parlor, watching the guests arrive through the window. Dalton looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, his dark eyes constantly scanning the room as if looking for threats. Whitfield, on the other hand, seemed entirely too pleased to be there. He was an older man, perhaps 50, with silver hair and cold gray eyes that reminded Isabel of a wolf. Second thoughts? Catherine's voice came from behind her. Isabel turned, keeping her expression calm. None at all. Catherine smiled that cold smile. How brave you are. Or perhaps the word is foolish. Perhaps it's both. Indeed. Catherine moved closer, and Isabel caught a whiff of something bitter on her breath. I do hope you last longer than the others. It's so tiresome, constantly training new girls. I plan to be around for a very long time. We'll see. Catherine held out a glass. Sherry? For nerves? Thank you, no. I don't drink before noon. Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly. How provincial. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, and Isabel's breath caught. He was handsome in his dark suit, but there was something in his eyes, a sadness, a weight, that made him look older than his years. It's time, he said. The ceremony itself was brief. The local preacher, a nervous man who kept glancing at Catherine, stumbled over the words. When he asked if anyone objected, the room fell silent, but Isabel could feel the weight of unspoken protests. I object, a voice said from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Marcus Whitfield stood, his gray eyes fixed on Jonathan. On what grounds? Jonathan asked, his voice deadly quiet. On the grounds that you're marrying this innocent girl under false pretenses, Whitfield said. Does she know about the others? Does she know about Margaret? Margaret left of her own accord, Jonathan said. Did she? Whitfield pulled out a telegram. Because I have here a message from the Pinkerton Agency. They haven't heard from their operative in 6 months. They're sending investigators. The room erupted in whispers. Isabel saw Catherine's face go white, then red with rage. How dare you? Catherine hissed. How dare you come into our home and make such accusations? I dare because it's true, Whitfield replied. Margaret Foster was working for me, yes, but she was also a human being who deserved better than whatever fate befell her here. Get out, Jonathan said, his voice low and dangerous. Gladly. But know this, Mercer, the investigators will be here within the week, and when they find what I know they'll find, This ranch will be mine, as it should have been all along. He strode out, leaving chaos in his wake. The preacher was muttering about scandal, the neighbors were whispering, and Dalton was watching everything with those sharp, dark eyes. "Perhaps we should postpone," the preacher began. "No," Isabel said, surprising everyone, including herself. "We continue." "Miss Harrington," Jonathan said, "you don't have to—" "Yes," she said firmly, "I do." She couldn't explain why, but something in Whitfield's threat had crystallized her resolve. If investigators were coming, if the truth was about to be exposed anyway, then she might as well be in a position to influence what happened next. The preacher, clearly eager to be done with the whole affair, rushed through the rest of the ceremony. When Jonathan kissed her, his lips were cold. "Why?" he whispered against her mouth. "Because someone needs to stand with you when the storm comes," she whispered back. The reception was a strained affair. The neighbors left quickly, citing various excuses. Dalton lingered, approaching Isabel when she was momentarily alone. "That was either very brave or very stupid," he said. "People keep telling me that. Whitfield's not bluffing about the investigators." "I know." He studied her. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Another lamb to the slaughter." "But you're no lamb, are you?" Before she could answer, Catherine appeared. "Mr. Dalton, how good of you to come. Mrs. Catherine." He tipped his hat to Isabel. "Mrs. Mercer. Remember what I said, 10 miles due east." After he left, Catherine turned to Isabel. "Already making friends with our enemies." "Is that what he is? An enemy?" "Everyone's an enemy, girl. You'd do well to remember that." As the sun set on her wedding day, Isabel found herself alone in the study where Margaret had argued with someone the night she vanished. The room was masculine, dominated by a massive desk and walls of ledgers. She was examining the bookshelves when she noticed something odd. One section of books was less dusty than the others, as if they'd been recently moved. She pulled at them and gasped as the entire section swung inward, revealing a hidden room. Inside were documents, dozens of them, land deeds, contracts, and, her blood ran cold, death certificates. Sarah Morrison died of fever. Emma Cartwright died in childbirth, but no certificate for Margaret. "You shouldn't be in here." She spun to find Catherine standing in the doorway, and in her hand was a pistol. The pistol in Catherine's hand gleamed dull silver in the lamplight, its barrel pointed directly at Isabel's heart. The older woman stepped into the study, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a death knell in the silence. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this room," Catherine said, her voice conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than standing on the precipice of murder. "Margaret found it on her 3rd day. You've managed it in less than 24 hours. "Impressive." Isabel forced herself to remain calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Is this how it happened with the others? Did you corner them with a gun when they learned too much?" Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, my dear, you give me too much credit. I've never needed anything so crude as a bullet. Poison is so much more elegant, don't you think? A little something in the tea, a gradual weakening, a tragic illness. Everyone's so sympathetic when a young bride falls ill in the harsh Montana climate." "Emma," Isabel breathed. "You poisoned Emma." "Emma was weak," Catherine spat, simpering, crying, always clinging to Jonathan. She would have ruined him with her softness. This ranch needs strength to survive, not some weeping girl who couldn't even carry a child properly. She was pregnant? For about 5 minutes before her body rejected it, probably for the best. Weak mothers make weak sons. Catherine moved further into the room, the gun never wavering. Sarah was different. Greedy little thing, that one. Found these very documents and tried to blackmail us. Can you imagine? A nobody from Chicago thinking she could threaten the Mercer family. So you killed her too. I gave her a choice. Leave quietly with a modest sum, or stay and face the consequences. She chose poorly. Isabel's mind raced, searching for a way out. The hidden door was behind her, but Catherine blocked the main exit. And Margaret? What was her sin? Catherine's face darkened. Margaret was the worst of all, a spy. A Pinkerton operative sent by that bastard Whitfield to destroy us. She documented everything, photographed documents, compiled evidence. She was going to bring this entire family down. Where is she? Where she can't hurt anyone anymore. Catherine's smile was terrible. You know, I actually liked you at first. You seemed practical, hardened by poverty. I thought perhaps you'd be the one to understand that survival requires sacrifice. I understand sacrifice, Isabel said carefully, inching backward, but not murder. Don't be naive.
This entire ranch is built on murder. My brother, Jonathan's father, didn't become the most powerful man in the territory by being gentle. He took what he wanted, removed obstacles, crushed enemies. I'm simply continuing his legacy. By killing innocent women? Innocent? Catherine laughed again. None of you were innocent. You all came here for money, security, comfort. You're no different from vultures circling a carcass. I came here for a chance at a better life. And you'll get one, Catherine said, raising the gun slightly. In the next world. The door burst open, and Thomas rushed in. Catherine, no! The older woman didn't even turn. Go away, Thomas. This doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't. He moved into the room, positioning himself between Catherine and Isabel. You can't keep doing this. I can and I will. This ranch is all we have. Without it, we're nothing. We're nothing with it if we've sold our souls to keep it, Thomas countered. Father's sins don't have to be ours. Your father was a great man. My father was a murderer and a thief, and you know it. Thomas's voice was hard. I've read the documents, Catherine. All of them, including the ones you thought you'd burned. Catherine's face went white. What documents? The ones about what really happened to Marcus Whitfield's brother. The ones that prove father didn't just steal his land. He killed him for it. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Thomas pulled a leather folder from inside his coat. Margaret didn't just document recent crimes, Catherine. She found evidence of the original sin, the murder that started it all. Catherine's hand began to tremble. Where did you get that? From Margaret's final hiding place. The one you never found because you killed her before she could reveal it. She was going to destroy us. No, Thomas said quietly. We destroyed ourselves the moment we chose blood over justice. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene. Catherine with the gun, Thomas shielding Isabel, the open secret room. His face was a study in horror and realization. Catherine, he said, his voice hollow. Tell me you didn't. Everything I did was for this family, Catherine said, but her voice had lost its strength. For you, for the legacy. You killed them, Jonathan said, understanding finally dawning. Sarah, Emma, Margaret, you killed them all. I protected us. I protected what your father built. You turned us into monsters. Jonathan moved into the room, his movements careful, deliberate. Put the gun down, Aunt Catherine. You ungrateful boy. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. You sacrificed others, Jonathan corrected. That's not the same thing. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Isabel could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 3 dead women pressing against the walls of the hidden room. She thought of Margaret, brilliant and brave, uncovering the truth, only to die for it. She thought of Emma, in love and pregnant, poisoned by the woman who should have protected her. She thought of Sarah, ambitious perhaps, but not deserving death. Give me the gun, Catherine, Jonathan said again, extending his hand. So you can hand me over to Whitfield's investigators. So you can let them destroy everything? The ranch is already destroyed, Thomas said. Can't you see that? We're living in a mausoleum, surrounded by ghosts. Better ghosts than poverty, Catherine snarled. Is it? Isabel found her voice. Is it really better? You've turned this beautiful place into a graveyard. You've turned yourself into the very monster your brother was. And for what? Land? Money? Power over a dying empire? You don't understand, Catherine said. You couldn't possibly understand what it was like. We came here with nothing. Nothing. We fought Indians, drought, winter storms that killed half our cattle.
We earned this land with blood and sweat and sacrifice. And then you kept it with murder, Isabel said. Where does it end, Catherine? When Jonathan has no bride and no heir, when the ranch dies with your generation, when there's no one left to remember any of you except as cautionary tales? Catherine's face crumpled, and for a moment, Isabel saw not a murderer but a frightened old woman clinging to the past. Then the moment shattered as hoofbeats thundered outside. Through the window they could see riders approaching, a dozen men with badges glinting in the moonlight. The Pinkertons, Thomas said. They're here. Catherine's face hardened again. Then we're finished. We were finished the moment you killed Margaret, Jonathan said quietly. Catherine looked at him, and something in her eyes broke. I did it for you, she whispered. All of it, for you. I never asked you to. You never had to. The front door crashed open, and voices filled the house. Catherine looked at the gun in her hand, then at the faces around her. Thomas, resigned. Jonathan, devastated. Isabel, defiant. There's one more secret, Catherine said, her voice strange. One more thing Margaret never found. She moved to the desk and pressed a hidden lever. A panel slid open, revealing a compartment Isabel hadn't noticed. Inside was a single document. Your father's will, Catherine said to Jonathan. His real will. Not the one that was filed with the court. Jonathan took the document with trembling hands, reading quickly. His face went ashen. This says everything goes to Thomas. Your father wrote it the week before he died, Catherine said. He knew you were too soft, too much like your mother. He wanted Thomas to have the ranch. But Thomas was only 15 then, Jonathan protested, which is why I hid it. I couldn't let a child run this place. And by the time Thomas was old enough, Catherine shrugged. I'd already committed too many sins to turn back. Thomas stared at her. You kept this from me? From both of us? I kept this family together, Catherine said. Without me, you'd both be nothing. The Pinkerton agents burst into the study, guns drawn. The lead agent, a stern-faced man with graying temples, surveyed the scene. Mrs. Catherine Mercer? He asked. Catherine straightened, and for a moment she was again the imperious woman who'd ruled the ranch with an iron fist. I am. You're under arrest for the murder of Margaret Foster. Among others, Catherine said, and there was something like relief in her voice. You'll find Sarah Morrison buried beneath the old oak tree by the stream. Emma Cartwright's body was cremated, but the doctor who signed her death certificate was paid to lie. His name is Pemberton, and he lives in Billings. Catherine, Jonathan said, his voice breaking. She looked at him one last time. I'm sorry, my boy. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the truth. As the agents led her away, Catherine stopped beside Isabel. You won, she said quietly. You survived. Use it wisely. After she was gone, the three of them stood in the wreckage of the study. The lead Pinkerton agent remained, notebook in hand. I'll need statements from all of you, he said. But first, Mrs. Mercer, I believe you should see this. He handed Isabel a telegram. It was from a hospital in San Francisco, and it contained 7 words that changed everything. Margaret Foster alive. Memory lost. Recovering slowly. Isabel gasped. She's alive? Barely. She was found beaten nearly to death on the road to Billings, left for dead. A traveling doctor saved her, but she's only recently regained enough memory to contact us. Catherine must have hired someone to dispose of her, Thomas said. But they failed. Or chose not to complete the job, the agent suggested. We'll know more when Miss Foster is well enough to give a full statement. Isabel sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Margaret was alive. There was one less ghost haunting this place. What happens now? Jonathan asked the agent. That depends. The ranch appears to be built on a foundation of crimes, both old and new. There will be investigations, trials, possibly seizures of assets. Mr. Whitfield has legitimate claims to some of the land. All of it, a voice said from the doorway. Marcus Whitfield stood there, triumph written across his face. With the evidence of murder and fraud, I'll take everything. Perhaps, the agent said coolly, but that's for the courts to decide. Whitfield's eyes found Isabel. You've married into a dying dynasty, Mrs. Mercer. I hope you enjoyed your one day as a wealthy woman. After he left, Jonathan turned to Isabel. You should have our marriage annulled. You don't deserve to be dragged down with us. Isabel looked at him. This man who'd lied to her, who'd brought her into danger, who'd been blind to the evil in his own house. She should hate him. She should run. Instead, she saw a broken man who'd just lost everything he thought he knew about his family, his legacy, his life. The marriage stands, she said quietly. Isabel, you don't understand. We'll lose everything. The ranch, the money, probably even the house. Then we'll rebuild. With what? She thought of the sewing skills that had kept her alive in Boston, the strength that had survived poverty, the determination that had faced down a killer. With our hands, she said, with honest work, with the truth for once. Thomas stepped forward. According to Father's real will, the ranch is mine. I won't fight for all of it. Whitfield can have what was stolen from his family, but there's enough land that was legitimately purchased. We could start over, smaller, honest. Jonathan looked at his younger brother. You'd share it with me? After everything? You're my brother, Thomas said simply. Catherine's sins aren't yours. The agent cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Miss Foster's telegram included a message specifically for the new Mrs. Mercer. He handed Isabel another paper. In shaky handwriting it read, The Silver Mine. North Pasture. Never told anyone. Your wedding gift. M.F. Thomas frowned. Silver mine? There's no mine on our land. Not that we knew of, Jonathan said slowly. But Margaret was thorough. If she says there's a mine, then there's a mine, Isabel finished. The implications were staggering. If there was silver on the land, it could mean survival, even prosperity, without the blood money of the past. Over the next days, the ranch transformed into something resembling a crime scene. Investigators combed the grounds, finding Sarah's remains exactly where Catherine had said they would be. They interviewed every servant, every ranch hand, every neighbor who'd known the Mercer family. Isabel spent her time going through Margaret's hidden notes, which Thomas had retrieved from various hiding spots around the ranch. The woman had been brilliant, thorough, and ultimately tragic. But she'd also been right about the silver. The mine was old, probably Spanish, long abandoned and forgotten. But the vein was real, and according to the geology expert the Pinkertons brought in, potentially valuable. It's on the section of land that was legitimately purchased, the expert confirmed. The original deed from the Spanish grant. Whitfield has no claim to it. Isabel found Jonathan standing at the entrance to the mine, staring into the darkness. Ironic, isn't it? He said. All those crimes, all those deaths, and there was honest wealth here all along. Your father never knew? He was too busy stealing from others to look at what he already had. Jonathan turned to her. Why did you stay? Really? Isabel considered the question. Because I've been running my whole life. From poverty, from pain, from the fear that I was worth nothing. When I stood in that study with a gun pointed at me, I realized I was tired of running. You could have been killed. Yes, but I would have died standing my ground. That seemed better than living on my knees. Jonathan studied her face. I don't deserve you. No, she agreed. You don't. But maybe you could earn me. How? By being the man this ranch needs. The man this territory needs. Honest, just, making amends for the past instead of hiding from it. That's a tall order. Yes, it is. The trial of Catherine Mercer became the sensation of the territory. She stood accused of 3 murders: Sarah Morrison, Emma Cartwright, and the attempted murder of Margaret Foster. She confessed to all of it, seemingly relieved to finally tell the truth. Isabel attended every day, sitting in the packed courtroom as the full story emerged. Catherine had been shaped by the violence of the frontier, twisted by the need to survive at any cost. She'd watched her brother build an empire on blood and decided that blood was simply the price of greatness. Margaret Foster testified via written statement, still too weak to travel. Her words were damning, clinical, and heartbreaking. She'd come to the ranch to investigate old crimes and found new ones. She'd fallen in love with the land, if not the man, and had genuinely considered staying until she'd uncovered the truth about the other brides. I confronted Mrs. Catherine Mercer on the night of June 15th, the prosecutor read from Margaret's statement. I told her I knew what she'd done and that I would expose her. She struck me with a candlestick, and I fell. The last thing I remember is her standing over me saying that the ranch must survive, no matter the cost. Catherine was found guilty on all counts. As they led her away to spend the rest of her life in prison, she looked at Isabel one last time. Take care of them, she said. They're weak, both of them. They'll need your strength. Isabel nodded, understanding passing between them. Catherine was a monster, but she was a monster who'd loved in her own twisted way. The division of the ranch took months to settle. Whitfield got significant portions of land, the parts that had been stolen from his family and others. But the core of the ranch, including the silver mine, remained with Thomas and Jonathan. They worked out an arrangement where Thomas would manage the cattle operation while Jonathan developed the mine. Isabel found herself in charge of the household, bringing in new staff to replace those too traumatized by the recent revelations to stay. Alice stayed, promoted to head housemaid. Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper who'd warned Isabel that first night, became her closest confidant and advisor. I never thought I'd see this place free of her shadow, Mrs. Holloway said one morning as they went over the accounts. Catherine ruled through fear for so long, we'd forgotten what it was like to breathe freely. Fear is a powerful weapon, Isabel agreed, but hope is stronger. Is that what you're offering? Hope? I'm offering a chance to build something new, something clean. The silver mine proved to be moderately successful, not a bonanza, but enough to keep the reduced ranch profitable without the need for the violent tactics of the past. Jonathan threw himself into the work with a dedication that surprised everyone, perhaps trying to atone for his blindness to Catherine's crimes. One evening, 3 months after the trial, Isabel found him in the study, the same room where Catherine had held her at gunpoint. He was going through old papers, sorting them into piles. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Trying to figure out which contracts were legitimate and which were coerced. I want to make reparations where possible. That could bankrupt us. Then we'll be honestly bankrupt rather than dishonestly wealthy." She moved to help him, and they worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Jonathan spoke quietly. "I dream about them sometimes. Sarah, Emma, Margaret. They stand at the foot of my bed, accusing me. Margaret's alive, but she almost wasn't. And the others, I should have known, should have seen. Catherine was careful. She fooled everyone. She didn't fool you. I had the advantage of being the fourth. I could see the pattern." Jonathan set down the papers he was holding. "Do you think you could ever forgive me? For bringing you into this? For the lies?" Isabel considered the question. Over the past months, she'd seen him work tirelessly to right old wrongs. She'd watched him face the community's scorn with dignity. She'd observed his genuine remorse and his determination to be better than his father, better than his past. "I think," she said carefully, "that forgiveness is earned through actions, not words. You're earning it day by day. And love?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Could you ever love a man with so much blood on his family name?" Isabel thought of her mother, dying in that Boston tenement, telling her to be brave, to seek more than mere survival. She thought of the train ride to Montana, full of hope and fear. She thought of standing in that study, choosing to stay and fight rather than run. "Love is more complicated than forgiveness," she said, "but it's not impossible." Ezra Dalton came calling one afternoon, finding Isabel overseeing the planting of a new garden where the old oak tree, Sarah's grave, had stood. The tree had been removed, the remains properly buried in the town cemetery. "Making changes, I see," he observed. "Making amends," she corrected. "Same thing sometimes." He dismounted, standing beside her to survey the work. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not doing more. I knew something was wrong here. We all did. But Catherine was—" He paused, searching for words. She was like a force of nature. It seemed easier to work around her than confront her. "Evil thrives when good people do nothing," Isabel said. A harsh truth. Dalton was quiet for a moment. I actually came to make you an offer. Oh, my ranch is successful, but I have no family, no heirs. I was thinking of taking on partners, expanding operations. The Mercer Ranch, what's left of it, would be a good fit. A merger? Of sorts.
Your husband and his brother have the land and the mine. I have the capital and the connections. Together, we could build something that would last, something honest.
Why would you help us? You and Jonathan have been rivals for years. Rivals, yes, but that was mostly about Catherine's machinations, pitting us against each other to maintain control. Dalton smiled slightly. Besides, I admire what you're trying to do here. It takes courage to rebuild on poisoned ground. I'll discuss it with Jonathan and Thomas. You do that. He moved to remount his horse, then paused. You know, when you first arrived, I thought you were just another lamb to the slaughter. I've never been happier to be wrong. That evening, Isabel presented Dalton's offer to the brothers.
They discussed it late into the night, weighing the benefits against the cost to their pride. In the end, pragmatism won. We need allies, Thomas said. Catherine made enemies of everyone. We need to reverse that.
Agreed, Jonathan said, though it clearly pained him. But equal partners, not junior ones. I'll negotiate the terms, Isabel said, and both men looked at her in surprise. You? I've been studying the books, the contracts, the law. I understand the business now. She straightened. Besides, I'm the only one here without a history with Dalton. I can be objective. The negotiations took a week, but in the end, Isabel secured terms that were favorable to all parties. Dalton was impressed, Jonathan was proud, and Thomas just laughed. We should have let you run things from the beginning, he said. Spring arrived with a letter from Margaret Foster, now recovered enough to write personally. Isabel read it aloud to Jonathan and Thomas in the study. Dear Mrs. Mercer, I hope this letter finds you well and thriving. I've heard of the changes you've brought to the ranch, and I'm glad something good has come from so much pain. I wanted you to know that I harbor no ill will toward any of you except Catherine, who has received her just punishment. I came to the ranch as a spy, but I stayed because I'd begun to see the possibility of redemption in that place. You've accomplished what I could only dream of. The silver mine was my secret, discovered during my investigations but never reported to Whitfield. I kept it hidden, thinking perhaps it could be Jonathan's salvation if he ever broke free of Catherine's influence. I'm glad it's now yours. I won't be returning to Montana. I've seen enough of death and deception for one lifetime. But I wanted you to know that you have my blessing and my admiration. You're stronger than I ever was. May you find the happiness that eluded those who came before you. Sincerely, Margaret Foster. She forgives us, Jonathan said wonderingly. She's giving us permission to move forward, Isabel corrected. There's a difference. Summer brought unexpected prosperity. The mine produced steadily, the cattle thrived under Thomas's management, and the partnership with Dalton opened new markets. The ranch that had once been built on blood and lies was slowly transforming into something legitimate. Isabel established a school for the ranch hands' children, bringing in a teacher from the East. She started a fund for the families of those who'd been wronged by the elder Mercer, quietly distributing money to help them rebuild their lives. One hot July afternoon, she was working in the garden when Alice came running, her face flushed with excitement. Mrs. Mercer, come quickly. It's Mr. Jonathan. Fear clenched Isabel's heart. She followed Alice at a run, expecting disaster. Instead, she found Jonathan in the study, holding a letter with shaking hands. What is it? She asked. He looked up and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. It's from a lawyer in San Francisco. My mother's family. I thought your mother had no family. So did I. But apparently she had a sister. She's been looking for us for years. Father told her my mother was dead, told us we had no other family. He held out the letter. She wants to meet us. She has letters from my mother, things Father kept from us. Isabel read quickly. The aunt, Josephine Hartford, was wealthy in her own right, having married a shipping magnate. She'd hired investigators to find her nephews after seeing news of Catherine's trial. Will you go to her? Isabel asked. Will you come with me? The question hung between them. In the months since their marriage, they'd developed a partnership, even a friendship, but they'd maintained separate bedrooms, separate lives in many ways. This would mean traveling together as truly married couple. Yes, Isabel said. I'll come. The trip to San Francisco took a week by train and stagecoach. They traveled in comfort this time, no longer needing to pinch pennies. Isabel watched the landscape change from Montana's rugged mountains to California's golden hills, feeling as if she were traveling not just through space but through time, leaving the old life behind. Josephine Hartford was nothing like Catherine. Where Catherine had been hard and cold, Josephine was warm and emotional. She embraced both Jonathan and Thomas, who joined them at the last minute, with tears streaming down her face. "You look just like her," she said to Jonathan, "just like my dear Mary." They spent a week in San Francisco, learning about the mother they'd barely known. She'd been an artist, a dreamer, entirely unsuited to the harsh life of a Montana ranch. "She wrote to me until the very end," Josephine said, showing them bundles of letters. "She was desperately unhappy, but she loved you boys. These last letters. She knew she was dying. She begged me to come for you." "Why didn't you?" Thomas asked. "Your father threatened me, said if I came near his sons, he'd kill me." Josephine's face hardened. "I was young and frightened. I've regretted my cowardice ever since." She gave them their mother's paintings, delicate watercolors of Montana landscapes that somehow made the harsh territory look like paradise. Isabel studied them, seeing in them the same desperate hope that had brought her west. She saw beauty even in that hard place, Josephine said. She had that gift. "It killed her," Jonathan said bitterly. "No," Josephine corrected. "Your father's cruelty killed her. The land just witnessed it." On their last night in San Francisco, Isabel stood on the balcony of their hotel, looking out at the bay. Jonathan joined her, standing close but not touching. "Thank you," he said, "for coming, for everything. You needed to know the truth about your mother. I needed you with me." He turned to face her. "Isabel, these past months, you've shown me what real strength looks like. Not Catherine's cruelty disguised as strength, but actual courage. The courage to face the truth, to make amends, to build rather than destroy. I've just done what needed to be done." "No, you've done so much more." He took her hands, his touch gentle. "I know I have no right to ask, but could we try to make this marriage real? Not just a legal arrangement, but a partnership?" she suggested. "A love match," he corrected, "because I do love you, Isabel. Not because you saved the ranch or exposed Catherine or negotiated with Dalton, but because you're the bravest, most honest person I've ever known." Isabel looked into his eyes, seeing the man he was becoming rather than the man he'd been. She thought of all the reasons to say no, the lies, the danger he'd put her in, the ghosts that would always haunt them. Then she thought of the reasons to say yes, his genuine remorse, his hard work to make amends, the gentleness she'd seen him show to the ranch hand's children, the way he'd held his mother's paintings like sacred relics. "Yes," she said simply. He kissed her then, not the cold, formal kiss of their wedding day, but something warm and real and full of promise. When they returned to Montana, they found the ranch thriving under Thomas's management. He'd implemented new farming techniques, improved conditions for the workers, and even started negotiations to bring the railroad through their land, legitimately this time. "I think I've found my calling," he told them over dinner their first night back. "This land, these people, it's what I was meant to do." "Father would be rolling in his grave," Jonathan said. "Good," Thomas replied. "Maybe that'll keep him from haunting us." That night, Isabel moved her belongings into Jonathan's room, their room now. As she unpacked, she found the letter she'd written that first night, the one documenting her fears. She read it again, marveling at how much had changed. "What's that?" Jonathan asked. "A letter to myself. A reminder of why I stayed." He read it, his face grave. "You were terrified." "Yes." "But you stayed anyway." "Yes." "Why?" She thought about it, then said, "Because I was more afraid of being a coward than of being killed. And now? Now I'm not afraid at all." That wasn't entirely true. She still feared the future, the challenges of building something good on ground soaked with blood. But it was a manageable fear now, one that spurred action rather than paralysis. The first year passed with surprising swiftness. The ranch evolved from a place of suspicion and fear to one of opportunity and hope. Workers who'd fled after Catherine's arrest began to return, drawn by fair wages and decent treatment. Marcus Whitfield remained a thorn in their side, constantly challenging boundaries and seeking ways to claim more land. But without Catherine's violence to respond to his provocations, he was reduced to legal maneuvering that the partnership with Dalton could counter. One day, Whitfield came to the ranch personally, something he hadn't done since the wedding. Isabel received him in the parlor, Jonathan and Thomas flanking her. "I have a proposition," he said without preamble. "We're listening," Isabel replied. "I'm old. I have no heirs. My quarrel was with your father, not with you." He looked at the brothers. "I propose a truce. A real one. Your family wronged mine, that's undeniable. But continuing this feud serves no one." "What are you suggesting?" Thomas asked. "A marriage of our holdings. Not through partnership, but through an actual marriage. I have a niece, Elizabeth. She's educated, intelligent, and of marriageable age." "You want one of us to marry your niece?" Jonathan asked incredulously. "Thomas, specifically. He's unwed, and from what I hear, he's the better businessman anyway." Thomas laughed. "You want to settle a blood feud with a wedding?" "It's been done throughout history," Whitfield pointed out. "Think about it. Our combined holdings would be the largest in the territory. We could bring real civilization to this place. Schools, hospitals, proper towns." "I won't marry for land," Thomas said firmly. "Then meet her first. She's arriving next week to visit. If nothing comes of it, so be it. But at least consider the possibility of peace." After Whitfield left, the three of them sat in stunned silence. "It's not the worst idea," Isabel said finally. "It's medieval," Thomas protested. "It's pragmatic," she countered. "And you wouldn't be the first to marry for alliance. Look at Jonathan and me. That's different. You chose each other, eventually." "After starting as strangers brought together by circumstance," she reminded him. "At least meet the girl." Elizabeth Whitfield arrived the following week, and she was nothing like what any of them expected. Where her uncle was cold and calculating, she was warm and witty. Where he was fixated on the past, she looked to the future. "I know why I'm here," she said bluntly at dinner that first night. "Uncle Marcus thinks he's being clever, using me as a peace offering. What he doesn't realize is that I have my own agenda." "Which is?" Thomas asked, clearly intrigued despite himself. "To build something worthwhile in this godforsaken territory. I've been educated in Boston. I'm a trained nurse. I want to establish a proper hospital here. Uncle's money could fund it. Your family's influence could support it. And marriage?" She shrugged. "If it happens, it happens. But I won't be bargained off like cattle. If we marry Thomas Mercer, it'll be because we choose it, not because our families decree it." Isabel liked her immediately. The courtship that followed was surprisingly genuine. Thomas and Elizabeth discovered shared interests in land management, sustainable farming, and social reform. They rode together, discussing plans for the territory's future. They argued passionately about politics and philosophy. "I think I'm in trouble," Thomas confided to Isabel one evening. "Because you're falling for her?" "Because I can't tell if I'm falling for her or for the peace she represents." "Does it matter?" "Sometimes love and pragmatism align. Look at Jonathan and me. You really love him now?" "I do," Isabel said, surprising herself with the certainty of it. "Not the man I met at the train station, but the man he's become. The man he's still becoming." The autumn of that year brought changes that would reshape the territory forever. Thomas and Elizabeth's courtship had progressed to the point where even Marcus Whitfield seemed pleased. Though Isabel suspected the old man's satisfaction had more to do with potential land consolidation than his niece's happiness. Still, watching Thomas and Elizabeth together in the ranch's parlor one evening, their heads bent over architectural plans for the proposed hospital, Isabel couldn't deny the genuine affection between them. "The foundation needs to be deeper," Elizabeth was saying, her finger tracing lines on the blueprint. "Montana winters will crack anything less than 4 feet. That'll double the cost," Thomas pointed out, though his tone held admiration rather than criticism. Better to spend twice now than rebuild in 5 years, Elizabeth countered. Isn't that what you always say about the cattle shelters? Jonathan caught Isabel's eye from across the room, a small smile playing at his lips. They'd had similar arguments in the early days of rebuilding the ranch, before learning that compromise and mutual respect led to better solutions than either could achieve alone. A sharp knock at the door interrupted the domestic scene. Alice entered, her face pale with worry. Mr. Mercer, there's a rider here. Says it's urgent. The rider was one of Dalton's men, dust-covered and exhausted. Fire, he gasped, accepting a glass of water from Alice. The northern pastures. It's spreading fast. Everyone jumped to action. Within minutes, every able-bodied person on the ranch was mobilized. Isabel found herself organizing supplies while the men rode out to fight the blaze. Elizabeth, without being asked, began preparing medical supplies. There'll be injuries, she said matter-of-factly. Burns, smoke inhalation. We need to be ready. The two women worked through the night, transforming the main house into a makeshift hospital. By dawn, the first casualties began arriving. Ranch hands with singed clothes and burned hands, their faces blackened with soot. Elizabeth moved among them with professional efficiency, treating wounds while Isabel provided water and comfort. Jonathan returned mid-morning, his face grim. We've contained it, but we lost 200 acres of grazing land. Anyone killed? Isabel asked. No, thank God. But he hesitated. It wasn't natural. Someone said it. Who would do such a thing? Elizabeth demanded. Thomas, who'd just entered, answered grimly. Someone who wants us fighting each other instead of working together. He looked meaningfully at Elizabeth. Your uncle has enemies too. This partnership makes us all targets. Marcus Whitfield arrived within the hour, his usual cold demeanor replaced by hot fury. This is intolerable, he declared. I've received word that my eastern holdings were hit too. Coordinated attacks. Any idea who? Jonathan asked. Whitfield's jaw clenched. Randall Covington. He's been buying up land around us for months, trying to corner the market before the railroad comes through. Isabel knew the name. Covington was a new player in the territory, a wealthy industrialist from Chicago who treated Montana like his personal monopoly board. He'd already driven out several smaller ranchers through aggressive tactics, though nothing as blatant as arson. We can't prove it was him, Thomas pointed out. We don't need to prove it in court, Whitfield said darkly. There are other forms of justice. No, Isabel said sharply, and everyone turned to look at her. That's Catherine's way. That's how this ranch got cursed in the first place. We're not returning to violence. Then what do you suggest, Mrs. Mercer? Whitfield's tone held a challenge. We use the law. We document everything. We build a case. She looked at Elizabeth. Your hospital project, expand it. Make it a symbol of civilization coming to this territory. Make Covington look like the barbarian he is. Elizabeth's eyes lit up. A public campaign. Articles in the Eastern newspapers about our progressive approach to territorial development. While privately investigating every land deal Covington's made, Thomas added, catching on, if he's been this aggressive with us, he's likely cut corners elsewhere. Whitfield studied them all with something like surprise. You're proposing to fight a range war with paperwork and public opinion? It worked against Catherine, Jonathan reminded him. The truth, properly presented, is more powerful than any gun. The old man was quiet for a long moment, then laughed, a rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in years. Perhaps you youngsters aren't as foolish as I thought. The campaign against Covington became a joint effort that, ironically, cemented the alliance between the former enemies. Isabel found herself working closely with Marcus Whitfield, discovering that beneath his cold exterior lay a sharp legal mind and a surprising sense of justice. I was wrong about your husband's family, he admitted one afternoon as they reviewed land records in the study. Oh, his father was still a bastard who killed my brother, but you've all chosen a different path. It wasn't easy, Isabel said. There were times when violence seemed like the simpler solution. But not the right one. No, not the right one. Right one. Their investigation uncovered a pattern of fraud in Covington's land acquisitions. He'd been filing false homestead claims using fake names, then consolidating the holdings under his company. It was illegal, but proving it required matching handwriting samples and tracking down witnesses who were often too frightened to testify. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One evening, a woman appeared at the ranch's gate, asking for Isabel specifically. She was young, perhaps 20, with the hardened look of someone who'd seen too much too soon. "My name is Clara," she said, clutching a carpetbag. I worked for Mr. Covington, in his house." Isabel brought her inside, sensing there was more to the story. Over tea, with Elizabeth and Mrs. Holloway present, Clara's tale emerged. "He brought me out from Chicago, promised me work as a governess. But there were no children. He had other uses for young women." Elizabeth's face darkened. "He hurt you?" "Me and others, but that's not why I'm here." Clara opened her bag, pulling out a ledger. "I took this when I left. It has everything, all his illegal dealings, the bribes, the false claims. Even," she paused, "even records of the fires he's ordered set." Isabel carefully examined the ledger. It was damning, detailed evidence of systematic criminality. "Why bring this to us?" "Because I heard what you did to Catherine Mercer. How you stood up to her, exposed her crimes. I hoped you might do the same to him." "This is dangerous," Elizabeth warned. "If Covington knows you have this..." "He already knows I left. His men are looking for me." Clara's voice trembled. "I didn't know where else to go." "You'll stay here," Isabel said firmly. "We'll protect you." Jonathan, when informed of the situation, agreed immediately. "We'll post guards. No one gets near her without our permission." But Covington was more resourceful than they anticipated. 3 nights later, Isabel woke to the sound of breaking glass. She shook Jonathan awake as shouts erupted outside. "They're here," he said, grabbing his rifle. The attack was coordinated and professional. Covington's hired men had surrounded the house, cutting off escape routes. But they'd underestimated the ranch's defenses. Thomas had learned from Catherine's paranoia, maintaining a well-trained security force. The gunfight was brief, but intense. Isabel found herself crouched behind an overturned table, Clara beside her, as bullets shattered windows above their heads. Elizabeth, remarkably calm, loaded rifles and passed them to the defenders. "Where did you learn to do that?" Isabel asked. "Uncle Marcus insisted I know how to defend myself," Elizabeth replied, checking the ammunition, "though I never thought I'd need it." The tide turned when Ezra Dalton arrived with his men, having seen the flames from the warning fires Thomas had lit. Caught between two forces, Covington's mercenaries retreated. In the morning light, they assessed the damage. Several wounded, but no deaths on their side. 2 of Covington's men had been captured and, faced with the prospect of hanging for attempted murder, were willing to testify against their employer. "We have him," Whitfield said with satisfaction. "Between the ledger, Clara's testimony, and these men, Covington is finished." The trial that followed rivaled Catherine's for sensation. Randall Covington, the wealthy Chicago industrialist, faced charges of fraud, arson, attempted murder, and what the prosecutor delicately termed crimes against feminine virtue. Clara testified with remarkable courage, her voice steady as she described not just her own ordeal, but the systematic abuse of multiple young women Covington had lured west with false promises. The ledger provided documentary evidence of his financial crimes. The captured mercenaries confirmed he'd ordered both the fires and the attack on the ranch. Covington's defense tried to paint him as a legitimate businessman persecuted by established ranching families protecting their monopoly. But the evidence was overwhelming. When Margaret Foster, fully recovered now, arrived to testify about patterns of corruption in the territory, comparing Covington's methods to those of the elder Mercer, it sealed his fate. "Evil doesn't change," Margaret said from the witness stand, her eyes finding Isabel in the gallery. "Only the faces wearing it. But neither does courage. There will always be those willing to stand against the darkness." Covington was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 25 years in prison. His assets were seized, his land redistributed to the families he'd cheated. Clara, with support from Elizabeth and Isabel, opened a small school for girls in town, determined to provide the education and protection she'd lacked. The victory celebration at the ranch was subdued but genuine. Marcus Whitfield raised a glass to the new generation. his weathered face showing something that might have been pride. "I came to this territory for revenge," he admitted. "I stayed for profit. But you've shown me something else is possible, something better." 2 weeks later, Thomas and Elizabeth announced their engagement. It was, they insisted, a love match that happened to be politically advantageous. Watching them together, Isabel believed it. They shared a vision for the territory's future that went beyond land and cattle to schools, hospitals, and genuine civilization. The wedding, held at Christmas, was everything Isabel's hadn't been. The entire territory seemed to attend, celebrating not just a union, but a symbolic end to the old feuds. Isabel stood as Elizabeth's matron of honor, Jonathan as Thomas's best man. "No ghosts here," Thomas whispered to Isabel during the ceremony. "We finally laid them to rest." But ghosts, Isabel had learned, were never completely gone. They surfaced in unexpected moments, like when she found Jonathan standing before the portraits of the dead brides, which he'd moved to a private room rather than destroy. "We can take them down," she offered. "No," he said quietly. "They're part of our history. We shouldn't forget, even if we've moved forward." "Do you still dream of them?" "Sometimes, but now they're peaceful. I think they approve of what we've become." The winter brought its own challenges. Heavy snows isolated the ranch for weeks, testing their preparedness. The silver mine had to shut down temporarily when the passages became dangerous, but they'd planned for contingencies, and the ranch survived on its reserves. During those long, snowbound weeks, Isabel and Jonathan grew even closer. They read together by the fire, planned improvements for spring, and talked about the future with a hope neither had possessed a year ago. "I want children," Jonathan said one evening, surprising them both with the admission. "I want to raise them here, on clean ground, with honest values." Even knowing the history, especially knowing it. They should understand that people can choose to be better than their past. Isabel touched her still flat stomach, where she'd recently begun to suspect new life grew. "Then you'll be pleased to know your wish might be granted sooner than you think." Jonathan's joy was overwhelming, tempered only by concern for her health. "We'll get the best doctor, the best care." "We'll get Elizabeth," Isabel corrected. "She's delivered dozens of babies in Boston." "I trust her more than any doctor." Spring arrived with 2 pieces of news that would reshape their world again. First, the railroad company confirmed they would build through the territory, with a station at the town. Land values would soar, bringing prosperity, but also new challenges. Second, Catherine had died in prison. The news came in a brief telegram, no details beyond the date and cause: pneumonia. Jonathan stared at it for a long time before speaking. "I should feel something," he said. "Grief, relief, anything. But there's just emptiness." "She was family," Isabel said. "Complicated, terrible family, but family nonetheless." They held a private burial, just the immediate household. Even Marcus Whitfield attended, standing silent as they lowered Catherine's coffin into the ground beside her brother. No words were spoken over the grave. What could be said? But Thomas planted a rosebush at its head. "Everyone deserves some beauty," he said when questioned. "Even her." With Catherine's death, the last connection to the old ways seemed severed. The ranch moved fully into its new identity as a force for progress in the territory. The hospital Elizabeth had designed broke ground that spring, funded jointly by all the allied families. The school Clara ran expanded to include boys as well as girls. Isabel's pregnancy progressed smoothly under Elizabeth's care. As her condition became known, she received visits from women throughout the territory, many sharing their own stories of coming west as mail-order brides, or seeking new lives on the frontier. "You give us hope," one woman said, "that we can be more than what we were brought here to be." But prosperity brought new challenges. The railroad's approach attracted speculators and opportunists. The town swelled with newcomers who didn't understand or respect the hard-won peace. Saloons multiplied, bringing violence and disorder. One evening, Ezra Dalton arrived at the ranch with troubling news. "There's talk in town of organizing against the established families. Some of the newcomers think we have too much power." "Don't we?" Isabel asked pointedly. "Perhaps. But we've earned it honestly, at least recently. These agitators want to take by force what we've built through work." "What do you suggest?" Jonathan asked. "Town council," Thomas said before Dalton could answer. "Proper governance, elected positions. Give people a voice so they don't feel the need to take one." "You'd risk losing control?" Whitfield asked, though his tone suggested respect rather than mockery. "Shared power is more stable than hoarded power," Elizabeth said. "We've seen what happens when families try to rule like feudal lords." The decision to establish democratic governance in the town was revolutionary for the territory. The established families would still have influence, but no longer absolute control. It was a risk, but one that aligned with their new principles. The first election was contentious. A populist candidate ran against Jonathan for mayor, painting him as the heir to corruption. The campaign forced Jonathan to publicly address his father's crimes and his own complicity through ignorance. "I won't deny our family's past," he said at a town meeting. "My father built his empire on blood and theft. My aunt continued that legacy through murder. I benefited from their crimes even when I didn't know about them. But I ask you to judge me not on what was, but on what we've done since the truth came out. Every stolen acre returned or compensated. Every crime exposed and punished. Every effort made to build something honest and lasting. He won, narrowly, with support from both old-timers who respected the changes and newcomers who saw opportunity in cooperation rather than conflict." Isabel gave birth on a hot July night, with Elizabeth attending and Jonathan pacing outside like every expectant father since time began. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and their son's first cry was strong and clear. "What will you name him?" Elizabeth asked, placing the baby in Isabel's arms. Isabel looked at Jonathan, and they spoke together. "Samuel Thomas Mercer." "After no one," Jonathan added firmly. "He starts fresh, with no ghost to honor or shame to inherit." As she held her son, Isabel thought about the journey that had brought her here. A desperate woman fleeing poverty, arriving at a house of secrets and death, choosing to stay and fight rather than run. She'd helped expose murder, survived assassination attempts, negotiated peace between blood enemies, and helped build something new on poisoned ground. "You're thinking deep thoughts," Jonathan observed, sitting beside her on the bed. "I'm thinking about the woman who got off that train 2 years ago. She could never have imagined this." "Are you happy?" Isabel considered the question. Happiness seemed too simple a word for what she felt. She was fulfilled, certainly, proud of what they'd accomplished, hopeful for what they might yet build. But happy? She looked at her husband, transformed from the haunted liar she'd met into an honest man working to redeem his family name. She looked at their son, born free of the sins that had stained his lineage. She thought of the hospital rising in town, the school educating children who would have otherwise grown up ignorant, the peace that had replaced blood feuds. "Yes," she said finally. "Despite everything, or perhaps because of everything, I'm happy." A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Thomas entered with a telegram, his face serious. "What is it?" Jonathan asked. "The governor's coming. He wants to see our experiment in person, maybe recommend it as a model for other territories." "That's good news, isn't it?" Thomas hesitated. "He's bringing federal investigators. There are questions about some of the old land claims, things that go back to Father's time. They might invalidate significant portions of our holdings." The room fell silent. After everything they'd overcome, the past still reached out to threaten their future. "Then we face it," Isabel said, adjusting Samuel in her arms. "We've hidden from nothing else. We won't start now." "It could cost us everything," Thomas warned. "We've already lost everything once," Jonathan reminded him. "We survived. We'll survive again if necessary." "Together," Elizabeth added from the doorway, where she'd been listening. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Marcus Whitfield appeared behind her, his presence still somewhat surprising at family gatherings. "The investigators will look at my claims too. We're all at risk." "Then we all stand together," Isabel said. "Former enemies united by truth rather than divided by lies." The preparations for the governor's visit consumed the rest of the summer. Every document was reviewed, every claim verified or marked as questionable. They found more irregularities than expected, shadows of the elder Mercer's crimes reaching further than anyone had realized. "We could fight this," Whitfield suggested during one late-night planning session.
Hire lawyers, dispute every challenge. And prove we've learned nothing, Isabel countered. No, we document everything ourselves, present it to the investigators. Show them we're committed to justice even when it costs us. You're talking about giving up thousands of acres. I'm talking about keeping our integrity. Isn't that worth more than land? Whitfield studied her with those sharp gray eyes. You really believe that? I do. The question is whether you do. The old man was quiet for a long moment, then laughed, fuller and more genuine than before. You know, I came here for revenge. Then I stayed for profit. But you've taught me something else might matter more. Very well, Mrs. Mercer. We'll do it your way. The governor arrived with great fanfare, his entourage including federal investigators, newspaper reporters from as far as New York, and curious officials from other territories. The entire town turned out to greet them, a testament to how much had changed. The investigation was thorough and sometimes painful. Standing in the study where Catherine had once held her at gunpoint, Isabel watched federal agents go through records that documented decades of crimes. Each revelation was another cut, but also another step toward cleansing. Jonathan testified about his father's methods, holding nothing back. Thomas provided documents he'd been collecting for years. Whitfield admitted his own family's part in the cycle of violence. Even Margaret Foster returned to provide context about the culture of corruption that had once ruled the territory. This is unprecedented, the lead investigator said after days of testimony. Usually we have to force this information out. You're volunteering it. We can't build a clean future on a dirty foundation, Isabel explained. Better to tear it down and start fresh than to wait for it to collapse on its own. The governor, a shrewd politician named Henderson, watched everything with calculating eyes. On his last evening, he asked to meet privately with Isabel. Why you? He asked without preamble. Why does a mail-order bride from Boston become the moral center of this transformation? Because I had nothing to lose, Isabel answered honestly. Everyone else had history, connections, complications. I arrived with empty hands and an outside perspective. I could see the rot clearly because I wasn't part of it. And now? You're part of it now. Now I'm part of something different, something we're building together. Henderson studied her. The investigators will recommend returning about 30% of the current holdings to federal control for redistribution. Can your alliance survive that loss? We've survived worse. Have you? This prosperity you've built depends on land and resources. Take away a third of that. Then we'll work harder with what remains. We'll innovate rather than expand. We'll build up rather than out. You really believe that's possible? Isabel thought of the woman she'd been, desperate and frightened on a train platform. She thought of the courage it had taken to stay in a house of death, to face down a killer, to choose building over destroying. Governor, I've seen impossible things happen. I've seen blood enemies become family. I've seen murderers exposed by their own conscience. I've seen a territory founded on violence choose peace. After all that, economic adaptation seems almost easy. Henderson's report, published in newspapers across the nation, held the Montana experiment as a model for territorial development. Yes, land would be redistributed. Yes, fortunes would shrink. But the cooperative approach between former enemies, the investment in infrastructure and education, the commitment to transparent governance, these were blueprints for civilizing the frontier. The land redistribution was painful, but not fatal. The alliance lost significant acreage but retained the most developed areas, including the silver mine and the prime cattle ranges. More importantly, they retained the respect of the community and the attention of investors interested in ethical development. We're going to be a state soon, Thomas predicted as they watched the railroad's first official arrival at the new station. And when we are, we'll be ready. The train brought more than goods and passengers. It brought Isabel's past in the form of Mrs. Adelaide Hartright, the factory owner's wife from Boston who'd once employed her. Isabel? Mrs. Hartright said, astonishment clear in her cultured voice. Isabel Harrington. Isabel Mercer now, she replied, trying to hide her discomfort at this collision of worlds. Mrs. Hartright's eyes took in Isabel's fine dress, the respect shown by those around her, the baby in her arms. My word. When you left so suddenly, we assumed.
Well, we assumed the worst. I found something better. Indeed, you have. Mrs. Hartright's tone held something that might have been envy. I'm here investigating investment opportunities. My husband thinks the territory might be profitable. It might be, Isabel agreed, for those willing to work honestly for their profits. The conversation that followed was surreal. The woman who'd once paid her starvation wages now seeking her advice on territorial investments. Isabel could have been petty, could have refused or misled. Instead, she provided honest assessment and even introduction to potential partners. "Why help me?" Mrs. Hartright asked. "I know we didn't treat you well." "Because holding on to old grievances poisons the future," Isabel replied. "I've seen what happens when people can't let go of the past. I won't be that person." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, an expanded family, now including Whitfield as a regular guest and various allies as frequent visitors, Isabel reflected on the strange turns life could take. The dining room where she'd first met Catherine's cold assessment now rang with warm laughter. The study where she'd discovered terrible secrets now held plans for schools and hospitals. The house of death had become a home of life. "You're philosophical tonight," Jonathan observed, finding her on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "I'm thinking about transformation," she said, "how a place can change completely while staying the same. This is the same house where Catherine murdered 3 women, where your father planned his crimes. But it's also where our son was born, where peace treaties were negotiated, where the future is being built." "Places are just places," Jonathan said, wrapping his arms around her. "It's people who make them holy or horrible. And we've chosen holy? We've chosen honest. Sometimes that leads to holy, sometimes just to human." Samuel started crying inside, and they both smiled at the sound, life asserting itself in a place that had seen too much death. As she went to tend her son, Isabel passed the spot where Margaret's portrait had once hung. It was gone now, given to Margaret herself, who'd wanted to remember her strength in facing danger. In its place hung a landscape Elizabeth had painted, showing the valley not as it was, but as it could be, dotted with homes, schools, churches, and fields of grain where now only grass grew. It was an ambitious vision, perhaps impossible, but Isabel had learned that impossible was just another word for untried. She'd survived when she should have died, found love where she'd expected only survival, and helped transform a cursed kingdom into something approaching grace. The story wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more tests, more moments when the past reached out with skeletal fingers to drag them back. But tonight, with her son in her arms and her chosen family around her, Isabel Mercer allowed herself to believe in the painted future on the wall. She'd earned that much, at least. The silver mine's whistle echoed across the valley, calling the night shift to work. It was a sound of industry, of progress, of honest labor for honest wages. Once these hills had echoed with gunfire and screams. Now they rang with the sounds of building. Thomas and Elizabeth announced at breakfast that they were expecting their first child. The news was greeted with joy tempered by concern. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, even with Elizabeth's medical knowledge. "We'll bring in additional help," Jonathan immediately offered, "the best midwife from Denver, if necessary." "I appreciate the concern," Elizabeth said with a smile, "but I trust our own resources. We've built something good here. Let's prove it by relying on it." The months that followed tested that confidence. Elizabeth's pregnancy was difficult, complicated by her insistence on continuing her work at the hospital even as she grew heavy with child. Thomas fretted constantly, his usual calm shattered by impending fatherhood. "I understand now how you felt," he told Jonathan. "The terror that something might go wrong, that the past might reach out one more time to exact payment." "The past has no more claims on us," Jonathan said firmly, though Isabel could see he shared his brother's fears. The baby came early, on a night when an early winter storm had made the roads impassable. No help from Denver could have arrived anyway. It was Isabel and Mrs. Holloway who assisted Elizabeth through the long labor, while the men paced and worried outside. "This is ridiculous," Elizabeth gasped between contractions. "I've delivered dozens of babies. This should be simple." "It's different when it's your own," Isabel said, remembering her own labor. "But you're strong. stronger than any of us. The baby, a girl they named Mary after Jonathan and Thomas's mother, arrived just as dawn broke through the storm clouds. She was small but healthy, her cries strong enough to bring tears of relief to Thomas's eyes. "Another new beginning," he said, holding his daughter for the first time. "Another soul born free of the past." But the past, Isabel was learning, was never truly gone. It surfaced in unexpected ways, like when young Samuel began walking and found his way into the hidden room behind the bookshelf, which they'd never sealed, keeping it as a reminder, or when a letter arrived from Sarah Morrison's sister seeking answers about her death. Isabel answered every letter, painful as they were. She told the truth about Catherine's crimes, about the family's complicity through ignorance or greed, about the changes they'd made since. Some relatives were satisfied, even grateful. Others remained angry, and she couldn't blame them. "You take on too much guilt," Jonathan told her after a particularly harsh letter left her in tears. "You weren't even here when those crimes happened. But I benefited from them. We all did. This ranch, this life. It's built on their deaths." "No," he said firmly. "What was built on their deaths, we tore down. What we have now, we built ourselves, honestly. Don't let anyone take that from you." The railroad brought prosperity but also complexity. The town grew from a few hundred to several thousand within a year. Crime increased, despite the best efforts of the town council. Cultural conflicts arose between established residents and newcomers, between different immigrant groups, between those who wanted rapid development and those who feared losing their way of life. Isabel found herself mediating more and more disputes, her position as a former outsider who'd become an insider, giving her unique credibility. She established a women's council that crossed cultural lines, bringing together established ranchers' wives, new immigrants, and working women like Clara. "We're half the population," she argued when some men protested the council's influence. "Our voices should be heard." The Women's Council pushed for and won several reforms: mandatory school attendance for all children, regardless of background, health inspections for the rapidly multiplying saloons and brothels, a fund to support widows and orphans. Each victory was small, but together they began reshaping the town's character. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for teaching positions at the expanded school, Isabel was surprised to see a familiar name: Margaret Foster. Margaret's letter was brief but heartfelt. She'd recovered fully from her ordeal, had spent time teaching in California, but felt drawn back to Montana. "Perhaps it's foolish," she wrote, "but I have unfinished business there. Not revenge. Healing. I want to help build what I once only investigated." The decision to hire Margaret was controversial. Many in town knew her story, knew she'd been a Pinkerton spy. Some saw her return as suspicious, others as inappropriate given the family's history. But Isabel fought for her appointment, arguing that Margaret's unique perspective and proven courage made her ideal for teaching the next generation. She survived what should have killed her, Isabel told the school board. Who better to teach our children about resilience? Margaret arrived on a crisp September morning, 3 years after her near death at Catherine's hands. She was thinner than in her portrait, her golden hair now touched with premature silver, but her eyes held a strength that hadn't been there before. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, extending her hand to Isabel at the train station. "Thank you for this chance." "Isabel, please." "We're far past formalities, don't you think?" Margaret smiled, an expression that transformed her serious face. "Then you must call me Maggie." Margaret Foster died in that attack. Maggie is who survived. The reunion at the ranch was awkward at first. Jonathan struggled to meet Maggie's eyes, the guilt of his blindness to Catherine's crimes weighing heavily. Thomas was overly formal, uncertain how to treat this woman who'd been both victim and spy. Even Elizabeth, usually so confident, seemed unsure. It was Samuel, now 3 years old and fearlessly curious, who broke the tension. He toddled up to Maggie and offered her his favorite wooden horse. "For you," he said solemnly. "Mama says you were hurt. Toys help hurts." Maggie knelt to his level, accepting the gift with equal gravity. "Thank you, young man. This is exactly what I needed." That evening, after the children were asleep, the adults gathered in the parlor, the same room where Isabel had first been assessed by Catherine. The irony wasn't lost on anyone.
I need to say something, Maggie began. I came here originally as a spy, yes, but what I found was more complex than Whitfield led me to believe. You weren't just villains to be exposed. You were people trapped by history, struggling to break free. That's why I started hiding evidence of good along with the bad. The silver mine, signs that Jonathan was different from his father. You were protecting us even then? Thomas asked. I was trying to be fair.
Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about the possibility of redemption. She looked at each of them. You've proven that possibility. That's why I wanted to come back. Maggie's presence in town stirred up old ghosts, but also brought unexpected benefits. Her testimony had helped convict both Catherine and Covington, earning her respect from law-abiding citizens. Her survival story inspired women throughout the territory. And her teaching proved exceptional. She had a gift for reaching troubled children, perhaps because she understood what it meant to be lost. One of her first students was a boy named Daniel Covington, Randall Covington's son, abandoned after his father's imprisonment. The boy was angry, violent, lashing out at everyone around him. Other teachers had given up, but Maggie saw something familiar in his rage. He's not evil, she told Isabel after a particularly difficult day. He's terrified. His whole world collapsed, and everyone treats him like he's contaminated by his father's crimes. Some would say he is. Then some would be wrong. We're not our fathers, Isabel. Isn't that what this whole experiment is about? Isabel watched Maggie work with Daniel over the following weeks, patient where others would punish, firm where others would coddle. Slowly the boy began to respond. His rage dimmed to wariness, then to cautious hope. How do you do it? Isabel asked. How do you look at him and not see his father? Because I've learned to look at Jonathan and not see his, Maggie replied. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Isabel. It's choosing to see people for who they are, not who they're related to. The lesson came at a crucial time. The territorial legislature was debating statehood, and old scandals were being dredged up by opponents who feared the power shift statehood would bring. The Mercer name was dragged through newspapers from Helena to Washington. Every crime of the elder Mercer detailed, Catherine's murder sensationalized. We should withdraw from public life, Jonathan said one evening, throwing down a particularly vicious editorial. Our presence is hurting the statehood movement. Our absence would hurt it more, Elizabeth countered. We're proof that the territory can govern itself, can address its own crimes without federal intervention. She's right, Whitfield said. He'd aged considerably, his health failing, but his mind remained sharp. Running now would confirm every accusation. Standing firm shows strength. The debate was interrupted by urgent knocking. Alice, now head housekeeper, entered with a frightened expression. There's trouble in town. A mob's gathered outside the school. They're demanding Maggie be fired and run out of town. Everyone jumped to action. By the time they reached town, the mob had grown to nearly 100 people, some carrying torches despite it being barely dusk. At their head stood a man Isabel didn't recognize, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to authority. Who's that? She asked Clara, who'd joined them. Mitchell Strand. Came in with the railroad money, bought up half the commercial district. He's been stirring up trouble for weeks, saying the old families have too much power. Strand was addressing the crowd as they approached. This woman was a spy. She conspired against the founding families, and now they've brought her back to teach our children? What are they teaching them? How to lie? How to deceive? How to survive? Maggie's clear voice cut through his rhetoric. She stood on the school's steps, small but unbowed. How to think for themselves. How to question authority, including mine. You have no right to be here. I have every right. I was hired by the legitimate school board, approved by the town council. If you have grievances, there are proper channels. The proper channels are controlled by the Mercers and their allies. Then run for office, Isabel stepped forward. Challenge us in the next election, but don't hide behind mob violence like a coward. Strand turned on her, his face flushing. Mrs. Mercer. The mail-order bride who somehow ended up running half the territory. How convenient that all your predecessors died or disappeared. The crowd murmured, ugly undertones building. Isabel felt Jonathan tense beside her, his hand moving toward the gun he'd started carrying again. She touched his arm, stilling him. Yes, I was a mail-order bride, she said, raising her voice to address the crowd. I came here with nothing but hope and fear. I survived an attempted murder by Catherine Mercer, helped expose her crimes, and worked to build something better on the ashes of the old corruption. If that threatens you, Mr. Strand, perhaps you should examine why. Pretty words from a pretty usurper. Ugly words from an ugly soul, Maggie interjected. I've investigated Mr. Strand's background. Would you like me to share what I found? Strand's face went white. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I face down killers, Mr. Strand. You're just a bully with pretensions. The standoff stretched taut until Thomas stepped forward. Folks, go home. This isn't who we are anymore. We settle disputes in council chambers and courtrooms, not with torches and threats. Anyone who stays is breaking the peace and will be arrested. As sheriff, a position he'd reluctantly accepted the previous year, Thomas had the authority to back up his words. Slowly the crowd began dispersing, though Strand lingered, glaring. This isn't over, he promised. No, Isabel agreed, but your way of doing things is. That night, Maggie revealed what she'd discovered about Strand. He was a fraud, his wealth built on embezzlement from Eastern investors who were now investigating. He'd come west to escape, hoping to establish himself before his crimes caught up. He's everything he accuses us of being, Maggie said. The projection is almost poetic. What do we do? Jonathan asked. We give him rope, Whitfield suggested, his tactical mind still sharp despite his failing body. Let him overreach. Men like that always do. Whitfield was right. Within a week, Strand had made a critical error, attempting to bribe a federal investigator who was in town reviewing territorial readiness for statehood. The investigator, an incorruptible man named Harrison, immediately reported the attempt. Strand's arrest was swift and decisive. Documents found in his hotel room revealed not just his Eastern crimes, but plans to manipulate local elections, intimidate opponents, and eventually seize control of the territorial government. He was planning a coup, Harrison told them, shaking his head. Economic warfare followed by political takeover. You people stopped something that could have destroyed any chance of statehood. The incident actually strengthened their position. The federal report praised the territory's handling of the crisis, particularly the restraint shown in the face of mob violence. Maggie became something of a hero, her calm defiance in the face of threats earning widespread admiration. I've been thinking, she said one evening as they all gathered for dinner, a weekly tradition now, about patterns. Catherine killed to preserve the past. Covington burned to claim the future. Strand tried to steal the present, but we're doing something different. We're trying to heal time itself to make past, present, and future work together. That's very philosophical, Thomas said with a smile. Maybe. But I think it matters. We're not just building a state. We're building a way of being that acknowledges history without being enslaved by it. Young Daniel Covington, who'd been invited to dinner at Maggie's insistence, spoke up for the first time. My father never understood that. He thought history was something to be conquered or erased. What do you think it is? Isabel asked gently. The boy, nearly a young man now at 15, considered. A teacher. Sometimes harsh, but always necessary. The wisdom from one so young, so burdened by his father's crimes, moved everyone. Elizabeth reached over and squeezed his hand. You're going to be all right, Daniel. Better than all right. As winter approached, Whitfield's health deteriorated rapidly. The old man who'd once been their fiercest enemy was now dying in a guest room at the ranch, tended by Elizabeth and visited daily by the family he'd once sworn to destroy. I should hate this, he said one evening, his voice barely a whisper. Dying in the house of my enemy. We're not enemies anymore, Jonathan said. We haven't been for some time. No, Whitfield agreed. You became family when I wasn't looking. Clever of you. Despite his weakness, he insisted on completing one final task, formally adopting Daniel Covington and naming him heir to what remained of his estate after the land redistributions. The boy needs a chance, he explained, a name that isn't poisoned. I have no sons. He has no father worth claiming. It works. Daniel, overwhelmed, could barely speak his acceptance, but the tears in his eyes said everything necessary. Whitfield died 2 days later, peacefully, with Elizabeth holding one hand and Isabel the other. His last words were, "Tell Thomas, the alliance holds." The funeral was attended by hundreds, a testament to how much had changed. Former enemies stood side by side, mourning a man who'd transformed from vengeful victim to elder statesman. Daniel, now Daniel Whitfield, gave a eulogy that moved even hardened ranchers to tears. "He gave me a future when I had none," the young man said. "He showed me that redemption isn't just possible, it's necessary. And he proved that even the deepest wounds can heal if we let them." Spring brought the news they'd all been hoping for. Montana would become a state. The celebrations were territory-wide, but Isabel felt a particular pride. They'd helped make this possible, not through the violence and corruption of the past, but through patient building and careful compromise. The Constitutional Convention included Jonathan as a delegate, one of the youngest but most respected voices. He fought for provisions protecting small farmers from large corporations, for women's property rights, for education funding. Not all his proposals passed, but enough did to matter. "You're becoming a politician," Isabel teased him one evening. "God forbid," he replied with genuine horror. "I'm just trying to make sure the mistakes of the past can't happen again." "They can always happen again. That's why we must stay vigilant." Samuel, now 5, interrupted their conversation by running in with a discovered treasure, an old photograph he'd found in the attic. It showed the elder Mercer, Jonathan's father, standing proud before the original ranch house. "Who's this, Papa?" Jonathan studied the photograph, his expression complex. "That's your grandfather, Sam. He did bad things, but he also built the beginning of what we have now." "Was he a villain?" "He was a man who made terrible choices. We try to make better ones. Will I make good choices?" Isabel pulled her son close. "We'll teach you how." That's all any parent can do. That summer brought an unexpected visitor, Clara's younger sister Helen, who tracked her down after years of searching. The reunion was emotional, two women who'd been separated by circumstances beyond their control. "I thought you were dead," Helen sobbed. "After you disappeared from Chicago, everyone said you'd been murdered or worse." "I nearly was," Clara admitted, "but I found strength I didn't know I had. And I found people who helped me remember my worth." Helen's arrival complicated things. She was scandalized by Clara's position, running a school for mixed classes of children. She couldn't understand the casual integration of former enemies, the respect shown to former servants, the authority given to women. "This isn't proper society," she protested at dinner one evening. "No," Isabel agreed. "It's better. It's honest society." The conversation that followed was heated but necessary. Helen represented the Eastern establishment's view of the frontier, a place to be civilized according to existing rules. The Ranch Alliance represented something different, civilization evolving from circumstances, creating new rules as needed. "You're playing with fire," Helen warned. "The established orders won't tolerate this kind of experimentation forever." "Then they'll have to adapt," Elizabeth said firmly, "because we're not going backward." Helen stayed for a month, gradually warming to their way of life. She was particularly impressed by the hospital, now serving hundreds of patients regardless of ability to pay. When she left, it was with promises to send medical supplies and books for the school. "You've converted her," Clara said with wonder. "We've shown her possibility," Isabel corrected. "People convert themselves." The first elections under statehood were contentious. Old guard conservatives ran against progressive reformers. The Ranch Alliance didn't endorse candidates as a bloc, but individually supported those aligned with their values. It was messy, democracy in its rawest form. Jonathan won a state Senate seat despite vicious attacks on his family history. Thomas was re-elected sheriff by a wide margin. Elizabeth was appointed to the State Board of Health, the first woman in such a position. Even Maggie found herself on the Education Committee, her teaching success impossible to ignore. "We're becoming the establishment," Thomas observed with irony, "the very thing we fought against." "No," Isabel disagreed. "We're becoming servants." There's a difference between holding power and stewarding it. The distinction would be tested sooner than expected. A dispute erupted between cattle ranchers and new farmers over water rights, threatening to explode into violence. Both sides appealed to the Ranch Alliance for support, knowing their backing could determine the outcome. The old way would have been to side with whoever offered the most or threatened the worst. Instead, they convened a water council, bringing together all parties to negotiate a sharing agreement. It took weeks of heated discussions, but eventually a compromise emerged. Not perfect, but workable. "You've created something new," Harrison, the federal investigator who'd become a friend, observed. "Not quite democracy, not quite oligarchy. A kind of earned authority based on moral credibility." "It's fragile," Isabel admitted. "It depends on us staying worthy of trust. All governance does. You're just more honest about it." That honesty would be tested when Samuel, now 6, came home from school crying. Some older boys had told him his family was built on murder, that his great-aunt was a killer, that he had bad blood. Isabel's first instinct was protective fury. Jonathan's was to find the boys and their parents, but it was Maggie who provided the wisest counsel. "Let me handle this," she said. "This is a teaching moment." She organized a special class on local history, requiring all students to research their family's pasts. The results were illuminating. Every family had shadows, crimes, secrets. The difference was that the Mercer secrets had been exposed and addressed. Samuel presented on Catherine's crimes, but also on the reforms that followed. Other children presented on their own family's struggles and mistakes. By the end, the class understood that everyone carried history's weight. The question was what you did with it. "You turned shame into education," Isabel told Maggie. "That's a gift. It's what someone should have done for Daniel earlier. For all of us, really." Daniel Whitfield, now 18, had grown into a remarkable young man. Under Maggie's tutelage and with his adoptive grandfather's legacy to build on, he'd become a voice for reform among the younger generation. When he announced his intention to study law in the East, with plans to return and practice in Montana, the entire alliance celebrated. "I want to make sure the law serves everyone," he explained, "not just those who can afford it." "Your father would hate that," someone said thoughtlessly. "Yes," Daniel replied calmly. "That's partly why I'm doing it." The ranch itself continued evolving. The silver mine played out but was replaced by innovative farming techniques Thomas imported from agricultural colleges. The cattle operation modernized, bringing in new breeds and methods. They were no longer the largest ranch in the territory, but they were the most successful per acre. "We're proving something important," Thomas said, reviewing the yearly accounts. "That honest prosperity is possible, that you don't need to steal or kill to succeed." "Tell that to our competitors," Jonathan said dryly. Several traditional ranchers resented their success, spreading rumors and occasionally attempting sabotage. "We don't need to tell them. We're showing them. Eventually they'll either adapt or fail." Isabel organized a harvest festival that year, inviting the entire county. It was a risk, bringing together so many people with histories of conflict. But it was also an opportunity to showcase how far they'd come. The festival was a success beyond imagination. Families who hadn't spoken in years shared tables. Former enemies danced together. Children played without knowing or caring about old feuds. "Look at this," Elizabeth marveled, holding her daughter Mary while watching the celebration. 5 years ago, half these people would have shot each other on sight. "Some still might, given the chance," Clara said pragmatically. "But they're not taking it." That's progress. As the evening wound down, Isabel found herself standing where she'd stood that first night, looking out at the Montana landscape. But now, instead of feeling trapped, she felt rooted. Instead of fearing the darkness, she saw the lights of homes built on hope rather than fear. Jonathan found her there, as she knew he would. "Regrets?" he asked. "None. You?" "Only that it took so much pain to get here." "Pain was the teacher," she said, echoing Daniel's words. "We just had to be willing students." A commotion from the barn interrupted them. They arrived to find Thomas holding a telegram, his face pale. "What is it?" Jonathan asked. "Catherine. She didn't die of pneumonia. This is from a prison guard who just retired, had an attack of conscience. She was murdered. Another inmate paid by someone outside. The news cast a shadow over the evening's joy. Even Catherine, terrible as she'd been, deserved justice." "Who would do that?" Elizabeth asked. She had no power anymore, no threat to anyone. "Someone cleaning up loose ends," Maggie said quietly. "Someone who didn't want her talking." "But she'd already confessed everything." Had she? Or were there secrets she kept even at the end? The investigation that followed revealed a deeper conspiracy than anyone had imagined. Catherine had been killed by an agent of a syndicate trying to monopolize Western lands, the same syndicate Covington had worked for, though he hadn't known the full scope. They're playing a longer game, Harrison explained when he arrived to investigate. Statehood means federal oversight, but it also means opportunities for those positioned right. They're eliminating anyone who might expose their networks. Are we in danger? Isabel asked. Possibly. You've disrupted their plans repeatedly. The question is whether they see you as obstacles or potential assets. The answer came in the form of an offer. A representative of the syndicate arrived with a proposal. Join them. Use their resources to expand and share in the coming prosperity. Or continue opposing them and face the consequences. You've built something impressive, the man, calling himself Mr. Smith, said. But you're small fish in an ocean full of sharks. We're offering you a chance to swim with the sharks instead of being eaten. And if we refuse, Jonathan asked, then you'll face the full weight of progress. Railways rerouted around your land, banks calling in loans, markets mysteriously closed to your goods, death by 1,000 economic cuts. You're threatening us? I'm explaining reality. This is bigger than Montana, bigger than personal honor. This is about the future of American commerce. After Smith left, the Alliance convened an emergency session. The threat was real. They'd all heard of ranches destroyed by economic warfare, families bankrupted by coordinated attacks. We could fight, Thomas suggested. Expose them like we exposed Catherine. They're too big, too distributed, Whitfield, Daniel now, having taken his adoptive grandfather's name fully, pointed out. It would be like fighting smoke. Then we bend, Elizabeth asked, disgust clear in her voice. We adapt, Isabel said slowly. We've done it before. We find allies, build coalitions, make ourselves too valuable to destroy. How? By becoming symbols, by making our story national. If we're known widely enough, they can't move against us without exposing themselves. The plan that emerged was audacious. They would invite journalists from major Eastern papers to document their experiment. They would showcase their alliance as a model for civilized development. They would make themselves too visible to be quietly eliminated. It's risky, Jonathan warned. We'll be exposing ourselves to scrutiny. We've survived scrutiny before, Isabel replied. Truth is still our best weapon. The journalists arrived in waves from New York, Chicago, San Francisco. They came expecting Wild West cliches and found instead a complex society grappling with modern challenges. They interviewed everyone from Isabel to the youngest school children, from former enemies now working together to servants who'd become landowners. One journalist, a sharp woman named Catherine Mills from the New York Times, was particularly interested in Isabel's story. You're not what I expected, she admitted over tea. The stories made you sound like some kind of frontier saint. I'm just a woman who refused to be a victim, Isabel replied. That might be the most radical thing of all. The articles that followed created a sensation. The Montana experiment became a national talking point. Letters poured in from across the country, some supportive, some critical, all engaged. The syndicate found itself unable to move against them without attracting unwanted attention. You've bought time, Smith admitted when he returned. But not victory. We're patient. We can wait. So can we, Isabel replied. And while we wait, we'll keep building. Keep proving that there's another way. Smith studied her with something like respect. You really believe you can change how America does business? We already have. In one small corner of it, change spreads, Mr. Smith, like water finding cracks in stone. After he left, Jonathan asked, Do you really believe that? I have to. The alternative is accepting that all our work, all our sacrifices were for nothing. And if he's right, if they're too big, too powerful, then we'll have lived according to our principles. That's its own victory. Samuel interrupted their conversation, running in with news that would change everything. Mama! Papa! Aunt Maggie found something in the old mine. They rushed to the played-out silver mine, where Maggie stood with a geological survey team she'd brought in for the school's science program. Her face was alight with excitement. It's not silver, she said. It's copper. a massive deposit deeper than the silver vein. The survey team estimates it's worth millions. The implications were staggering. Copper was the future, electrical wiring, telecommunications, modernization. With such a resource, they wouldn't just survive the syndicate's pressure, they could thrive independently. It's almost poetic, Thomas said. The mine that saved us once will save us again. If we can develop it without losing ourselves, Elizabeth warned, wealth has a way of corrupting even the best intentions. Then we'll have to be careful, Isabel said. We've come too far to fail now. The development of the copper mine required capital they didn't have. Traditional investors meant traditional compromises. Instead, they did something unprecedented. They offered shares to the community, to the workers, to anyone willing to invest small amounts. People's capitalism, Daniel called it. Ownership spread wide enough that no single entity can control it. The response was overwhelming. Small investors lined up, seeing not just potential profit, but participation in something meaningful. Even former critics invested, wanting to be part of the success story. The syndicate watched, frustrated. Their usual tactics, buying out major shareholders, corrupting management, wouldn't work against such distributed ownership. You're rewriting the rules, but Smith said during his final visit. I'm not sure whether to admire or pity you. Why not both? Isabel suggested. He laughed, the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him. Perhaps I will. You've won this round, Mrs. Mercer, but the game is far from over. We're not playing games, Mr. Smith. We're building lives. As the copper mine began production, bringing unprecedented prosperity, Isabel often thought about that scared woman stepping off the train 7 years ago. That woman had expected to find a poor farmer and a hard but simple life. Instead, she'd found murders and conspiracies, allies and enemies, challenges that had pushed her beyond any limits she'd imagined. But she'd also found love, not just with Jonathan, but with this entire community they'd built together. She'd found purpose in transforming a cursed legacy into a beacon of possibility. She'd found strength she never knew she possessed. Standing in the garden where Sarah Morrison had been buried, now blooming with life, Isabel watched her children play. Samuel, now 8, teaching his little sister Catherine, named for redemption, not the woman herself, how to ride. Thomas and Elizabeth's children ran alongside them, all of them unconscious of the bloody history beneath their feet. They'll never know, Maggie said, joining her. Not really. They'll know the facts, but not the fear. Good, Isabel said. That's the point. We survived the fear so they could live without it. And when the next challenge comes, because it will, then they'll face it with the tools we've given them, truth, courage, and the knowledge that even the worst situations can be transformed. You've become quite the philosopher, Isabel Mercer. I've had quite the education. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Isabel felt a deep satisfaction. Not completion, there was still too much work to do, but satisfaction that they'd chosen the harder path and walked it successfully. The knock at the door that evening brought unexpected visitors, a delegation from other territories come to study their model. As Isabel welcomed them, explaining how they'd transformed from blood feud to cooperative prosperity, she realized their story had become bigger than themselves. They were no longer just surviving or even thriving. They were teaching, showing others that American progress didn't have to mean American brutality, that civilization could grow from acknowledgement of sin rather than denial of it. Your experiment gives us hope, the delegation's leader said. If you could transform this place, perhaps we can transform ours. You can, Isabel assured her, but be prepared. The path is harder than you imagine and different than you expect. You'll face opposition from those who profit from the old ways, and skepticism from those who can't imagine new ones. But if you persist, if you're willing to sacrifice and compromise and occasionally fight, you can build something worth leaving to your children. That night, as the household settled into sleep, Isabel walked through the rooms where so much had happened. The study where Catherine had held her at gunpoint, the parlor where she'd first met Jonathan's lies, the hidden room where she'd discovered the truth. Each space held memories of terror and triumph. But now they also held the laughter of children, the discussions of progress, the plans for the future. The house that had been a memorial to greed and murder had become a home celebrating life and possibility. Jonathan found her in the study, looking at the space where the portraits of the dead brides once hung. Now it displayed a map of the county marked with schools, hospitals, churches, and businesses, all the infrastructure of civilization they'd helped build. "Do you think they'd approve?" he asked. "Sarah, Emma, Margaret, if she'd died?" "I think they'd be amazed that something so good came from something so terrible," Isabel replied. "And I think they'd want us to keep going, keep building, keep proving that their deaths weren't meaningless." "Even Catherine? Would she approve?" Isabel considered the question. Catherine had been a monster, but a monster created by monstrous circumstances. In her twisted way, she'd loved this place, had wanted it to survive and thrive. "I think," Isabel said carefully, "she'd hate what we've become, but respect that we survived to become it. She understood survival, even if she never understood grace." A sound from upstairs, Catherine crying, interrupted their reflection. As Isabel went to tend her daughter, she passed the silver mine photograph Maggie had given them, showing the copper vein that would secure their future. But it wasn't the wealth that mattered most. What mattered most was the crying child who needed comfort, the husband who'd learned to tell the truth, the community that had chosen cooperation over conflict, and the future they were all building together, one choice, one day, one act of courage at a time. Little Catherine's cries grew more insistent, and Isabel hurried up the stairs, her footsteps echoing through the hallway that had once witnessed so much darkness. As she lifted her daughter, soothing her with gentle words, she heard horses approaching fast, too fast for a social call at this hour. Jonathan was already at the window when she returned downstairs with Catherine in her arms. "It's Thomas," he said, tension in his voice. "Something's wrong." Thomas burst through the door, his face grim and dust-covered from hard riding. "We have a problem. The copper mine. There's been a collapse. 3 men trapped." The household erupted into action. Elizabeth grabbed her medical bag while Jonathan organized a rescue party. Isabel handed Catherine to Mrs. Holloway and prepared to join them, but Thomas stopped her. "There's more," he said quietly. "The collapse wasn't natural. Someone sabotaged the support beams. The syndicate? Or someone wanting us to think it was them? Either way, this is a declaration of war. At the mine, chaos reigned, but organized chaos. The community ownership meant everyone had a stake, and everyone had come to help. Miners, farmers, townspeople, all working together to clear debris and reach the trapped men. Daniel Whitfield had already set up a legal command post, documenting everything for potential prosecution. "If we can prove sabotage, we can bring federal investigators," he said. "This crosses state lines. The syndicate operates nationally." Maggie arrived with her students, the older ones helping with lighter work while she supervised. Young Samuel wanted to help too, but Isabel kept him back, though she let him carry water to the workers. "Why would someone do this, Mama?" he asked, his young face troubled. "Because they're afraid of what we're building," she answered honestly. "When people can't compete fairly, they sometimes turn to violence. Like Great Aunt Catherine did?" The question stopped her cold. Even the children knew the family history now. It was impossible to hide in a community that had made truth its foundation. "Yes," she said finally, "like she did. But we're choosing differently, aren't we?" "We're choosing to help," Samuel said firmly, and ran off with his water bucket. The rescue took 12 hours. When they finally broke through, 2 of the men were injured but alive. The third, a young father named Patrick O'Brien, hadn't survived the initial collapse. Elizabeth worked on the injured while Isabel comforted Patrick's widow, Mary O'Brien, a mail-order bride herself, arrived from Ireland just 2 years ago. The woman's keening grief echoed across the valley, a sound that brought back too many memories of other women's losses. "They said it would be safe here," Mary sobbed. "They said the bad times were over." "We'll find who did this," Isabel promised, "and we'll take care of you and the children. You're not alone." The funeral drew the entire county. Patrick O'Brien had been popular, a hard worker who'd invested his small savings in the mine and spoke proudly of being a part owner. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it was an attack on everything they'd built. Jonathan gave the eulogy, his voice carrying across the crowd. Patrick died because someone feared what he represented, ordinary people claiming their share of prosperity. They wanted to frighten us back into the old ways, where only the powerful prospered. But Patrick's death will not be in vain. We'll make sure of that. After the service, an unexpected ally appeared, Mr. Smith from the syndicate. He approached Isabel privately, his usual cold demeanor replaced by something like concern. "This wasn't us," he said without preamble. "We're businessmen, not murderers. Bad publicity hurts profits." "Then who?" "Someone trying to start a war between us. Someone who benefits from chaos." He handed her a card. "If you find them, call this number. We have a mutual interest in stability, Mrs. Mercer, even if we disagree on methods." The investigation that followed revealed a twisted plot. The saboteur was none other than Mitchell Strand's son, Robert, released from prison after his father's downfall and burning for revenge. He'd hoped to frame the syndicate, turning the community against outside investors while he positioned himself to buy up the panic-sold shares. He learned the wrong lessons from his father, Daniel observed sadly as they reviewed the evidence. Instead of seeing corruption's consequences, he saw only its techniques. Robert Strand's arrest should have ended the crisis, but it revealed a deeper problem. There were others like him, children and relatives of those who'd been exposed or imprisoned during the cleanup years, all nursing grievances and planning revenge. "We've created a generation of enemies," Thomas said during an emergency alliance meeting. "Every criminal we exposed, every corrupt official we brought down, they left behind people who blame us." "So what do we do?" Elizabeth asked. "We can't undo the past." "No, but we can address the future," Maggie suggested. "These people need purpose, need a way forward that doesn't require revenge." The solution came from an unexpected source, Mary O'Brien. Despite her grief, or perhaps because of it, she proposed something revolutionary. "Patrick always said the mind brought people together," she said at a community meeting. "Made them partners instead of rivals. What if we did that with our pain too?" Her idea was radical, a reconciliation commission, bringing together victims' and perpetrators' families, not for punishment, but for understanding and restoration. It was based on something she'd heard about from South Africa, traditional justice that healed communities rather than dividing them. "It's too soon," some argued. "The wounds are too fresh." "It's never too soon to start healing," Mary countered. "I don't want my children growing up poisoned by hatred." That's not what Patrick would want. The commission's first meeting was tense. Robert Strand sat across from the families his father had tried to destroy. Children of Catherine's victims faced the Mercer brothers. Daniel Whitfield met with relatives of those his biological father had swindled. Isabel facilitated, her unique position as both outsider and insider giving her credibility with all sides. "We're not here to forget or forgive," she began. "We're here to understand and move forward. The past happened. The question is, what future do we choose?" Robert Strand spoke first, his arrogance stripped away by imprisonment and failure. "I was raised on hatred," he admitted. "My father taught me that the world was about taking what you could and crushing those who opposed you. When he fell, I thought it was my duty to avenge him." "Why?" Mary O'Brien asked directly. "Why was Patrick's life worth your revenge?" Robert struggled to answer. "It wasn't. I didn't think about individuals. You were all just pieces on a board to me." "That's the problem," Daniel Whitfield said quietly. "When we stop seeing people as people, anything becomes possible. My father did that. Catherine Mercer did that. We have to choose differently." The sessions continued weekly for months. They were painful, often angry, sometimes seemingly hopeless. But slowly, understanding emerged. Not friendship, that was too much to ask, but comprehension of how they'd all been shaped by the territory's violent history. One breakthrough came when Robert revealed information about other planned revenge attacks, choosing to prevent violence rather than enable it. Another came when the son of one of the elder Mercer's victims publicly forgave Jonathan and Thomas, saying they shouldn't carry their father's sins. "Forgiveness is an absolution," he clarified, "but hatred is a poison that kills the one who carries it. I choose to put it down." The commission's work attracted national attention again. Journalists returned, this time documenting something even more remarkable than economic cooperation, moral reconciliation in a land built on revenge. "You're performing a miracle," Catherine Mills from the New York Times said. We're performing surgery, Isabel corrected, cutting out infection so the body can heal. It's painful and necessary, not miraculous. The copper mine reopened with new safety measures and a memorial to Patrick O'Brien at its entrance. Production exceeded expectations, bringing prosperity that spread throughout the county. The community ownership model meant everyone benefited, even former enemies who'd bought shares during the reconciliation process. But success brought new challenges. The town's population doubled within a year. Housing shortages, cultural conflicts, and infrastructure strain threatened to overwhelm their carefully built systems. A tent city grew on the outskirts, filled with desperate people seeking opportunity. We're becoming what we fought against, Elizabeth observed, looking at the shanty town from the hospital, a place where the established prosper and newcomers struggle. Then we expand what we've built, Isabel said. We've done it before. The solution required another evolution. They established a newcomers fund financed by a percentage of mine profits, providing temporary housing and job training for arrivals. Maggie expanded the school system, recruiting teachers from among educated immigrants. Thomas organized the new arrivals into work crews, building the infrastructure the growing town needed. One of the new arrivals brought unexpected connections to Isabel's past. She was supervising construction of a new dormitory when she heard a familiar voice. Isabel. Isabel Harrington? She turned to find Martha Henley, a woman she'd worked beside in the Boston textile factory. Martha looked older, worn by continued hardship, but her eyes widened with recognition. It is you. When I heard about a former factory girl becoming a power in Montana, I couldn't believe it. But here you are, giving orders like you were born to it. Martha, Isabel embraced her old friend. What brings you west? The same thing that brought you, hope for something better, though it seems you found more than you hoped for. Isabel brought Martha home, giving her work helping Mrs. Holloway manage the expanded household. Over tea, Martha filled her in on the fate of other factory girls, some dead from consumption, others still trapped in poverty, a few who'd found escapes through marriage or migration. You give them hope, you know, Martha said. Your story spread through the tenements. If Isabel Harrington could become a territorial leader, maybe any of us could rise. It wasn't easy, Isabel said, thinking of the gun in Catherine's hand, the attempts on her life, the constant battle against the past. Nothing worthwhile is. But you proved it's possible. Martha's presence brought Isabel's past into her present in unexpected ways. The woman's stories of continuing exploitation in Eastern factories sparked Isabel's interest in labor reform. She began corresponding with reformers, sharing the cooperative model they'd developed. You're taking on too much, Jonathan warned. We have enough enemies without challenging Eastern industrialists. We have enough strength to help others, Isabel countered. Isn't that the point of success, to lift others as we've been lifted? Her correspondence with labor reformers led to an invitation that would change everything, speaking at a national conference on economic justice in Chicago. The alliance debated whether she should go. It's dangerous, Thomas argued. You'll be entering the syndicate's home territory. It's necessary, Maggie countered. Our story needs to be heard beyond Montana. In the end, Isabel went, but not alone. Jonathan, Daniel, and surprisingly, Robert Strand accompanied her, a reformed criminal adding authenticity to their message of transformation. Chicago was overwhelming after years in Montana. The buildings scraped the sky, the streets teemed with more people than lived in their entire county, and the poverty was more concentrated and desperate than anything in the territories. The conference itself was a revelation. Isabel met reformers from across the nation, all fighting similar battles against entrenched power. Her speech about the Montana experiment drew a standing ovation. You've proven that there's another way, a union leader said afterward. Not socialism, not unfettered capitalism, but something new. Something old, actually, Isabel corrected. Community cooperation is ancient. We just adapted it to modern circumstances. But the real revelation came from an unexpected encounter. At the hotel, Isabel was approached by an elderly woman in expensive clothes who'd been watching her throughout the conference. You don't know me, the woman said, but I knew your mother. Isabel's breath caught. Her mother had died when she was young, leaving few memories and fewer connections. I'm Eleanor Pemberton.
Your mother was my maid before she married your father. She was brilliant, could have done anything if birth had placed her differently. I see she passed that brilliance to you." Eleanor revealed that Isabel's mother had come from a wealthy family that disowned her for marrying beneath her station. "There's an inheritance," Eleanor said. "Not much, but enough to matter. Your grandmother left it in trust, hoping someday to reconcile. She died waiting." The inheritance, $10,000, was indeed significant, but more important was the knowledge that her mother had chosen love over wealth, principle over position. It explained so much about the values Isabel had absorbed without understanding their source. "She would be proud of what you've become," Eleanor said, "not because of your success, but because of how you've achieved it." Returning to Montana with new connections and unexpected resources, Isabel found the territory transformed yet again. Statehood had brought formal government, but also bureaucracy and complications. The simple alliances that had worked in territorial days now required legal frameworks and official positions. An urgent message from Elizabeth awaited them. There'd been an outbreak of typhoid in the tent city. The hospital was overwhelmed, and fear was spreading faster than disease. The crisis required all their resources and connections. Isabel coordinated supplies, Jonathan organized quarantine zones, Thomas maintained order, and Elizabeth worked 18-hour days treating the sick. Even former enemies pitched in. Robert Strand proved surprisingly effective at managing logistics, his criminal past having taught him efficient organization. "Why are you helping?" Isabel asked him during a brief rest. "Because I finally understand what you've been building," he replied. "Not just prosperity, but purpose. My father never understood that wealth without meaning is poverty of the soul." The outbreak was contained, but at a cost. 37 dead, including 2 of Maggie's students. The memorial service became a testament to how far they'd come. Protestant and Catholic, native-born and immigrant, former enemies and allies, all stood together in grief and determination. "This is what community means," Mary O'Brien said at the service. "Not that bad things don't happen, but that we face them together." Her words proved prophetic when winter brought the worst blizzard in memory. The entire county was cut off for 3 weeks. The cooperative structures they'd built, shared resources, distributed leadership, mutual aid, meant survival where isolation would have meant death. During those snowbound weeks, Isabel worked on something new, a book documenting their experiment. Not a memoir, but a manual for others seeking to transform their communities. Maggie helped edit, her analytical mind catching gaps and clarifying concepts. "This could be dangerous," Maggie warned. "You're essentially writing a handbook for challenging established power." "Good," Isabel replied. "Power that can't withstand challenge doesn't deserve to stand." The book, when published, caused exactly the stir Maggie had predicted. The Montana Method, building community from conflict, became a sensation among reformers and a threat to those profiting from the status quo. Letters poured in from across the nation, from company towns seeking to break corporate monopolies, from immigrant communities organizing against exploitation, from women's groups fighting for suffrage and property rights. Each letter told a story of struggle against entrenched power, each writer seeking guidance from Montana's example. "We've started something," Jonathan said, overwhelmed by the response. "We've continued something," Isabel corrected. "The desire for justice is ancient. We just showed one way it could work." But with influence came responsibility. Delegations arrived seeking advice, reformers requested support, and conflicts emerged over how far to extend their involvement. Some in the alliance wanted to focus on local concerns. Others saw an obligation to spread their model. The debate was resolved by Samuel, now 10 and precociously intelligent. "Why not both?" he asked at a family dinner. "Some people can work here, others can go teach elsewhere, like seeds from a tree." His childish wisdom sparked a new initiative. They established the Montana Institute, a training center for community organizers. People would come, learn the principles and practices that had transformed the territory, then return home to apply them. Daniel Whitfield, fresh from law school, became the Institute's first director. "We're teaching revolution," he said with satisfaction. "Legal, peaceful, but revolution nonetheless." The Institute's first class included a fascinating mix: a former slave from Mississippi, a factory owner's daughter from Massachusetts, a Chinese immigrant from California,
and dozen others from across the social spectrum. Watching them work together, learning to see past differences to shared humanity, Isabel felt a deep satisfaction. "You've built something lasting," Eleanor Pemberton said, visiting for the Institute's opening. "Not just buildings or businesses, but ideas that will outlive you all. But lasting things still face threats." The syndicate, patient as Smith had warned, made another move. They began buying up railroad bonds, positioning themselves to control transportation costs. If successful, they could strangle the economic independence the county had achieved. "It's perfectly legal," Daniel said, reviewing the documentation. "Ruthless, but legal." "Then we respond legally," Isabel said, "but creatively." The solution came from the community ownership model. They created a transportation cooperative, pooling resources to build their own spur lines connecting to multiple railroad companies. It was expensive, requiring every reserve and calling in every favor, but it prevented monopoly control. Smith himself came to survey their response. "You're like a hydra," he said to Isabel. "Cut off one avenue and you grow two more." "We're like a community," she corrected. "Threaten one part, and all parts respond." "It's inefficient." "It's resilient. Efficiency without resilience is fragility waiting to break." He studied her thoughtfully. "You know, in another life, you could have led the syndicate. You have the intelligence, the strategic mind, the will to power, but not the willingness to sacrifice others for gain. That's what makes you dangerous to us. You prove our methods aren't necessary, just chosen. Then choose differently." "Too late for that. But I admire what you've built, even as I work to contain it." Their philosophical sparring was interrupted by urgent news. Fire again, but this time in the town. The commercial district was ablaze, multiple buildings involved. Everyone rushed to fight it, former conflicts forgotten in the face of immediate danger. The fire was devastating. 6 buildings destroyed, 2 deaths, dozens of families displaced. But the response was remarkable. Before the ashes cooled, plans were underway for rebuilding. The community ownership of the mine meant insurance and resources. The cooperative spirit meant volunteers and support. "We'll build better," Elizabeth said, sketching plans for fire-resistant construction. "Wider streets, better water systems, safer buildings." "Like a phoenix," Mary O'Brien added. She'd become a community leader herself. Her grief transformed into determination to prevent others' suffering. The rebuilding attracted attention from an unexpected source. President Theodore Roosevelt himself, touring Western states. He insisted on visiting the county, having heard of their experiment from various sources. "Show me this miracle," he said, his characteristic energy evident as he toured the mine, the schools, the hospital, the institute. "It's not a miracle, Mr. President," Isabel said, guiding him through the reconstructed commercial district. "It's work. Hard, constant, sometimes heartbreaking work." "The best kind of miracle, then. One built by human hands." He stopped at Patrick O'Brien's memorial. "Tell me about this man." Mary O'Brien herself answered, speaking of her husband's hope, his pride in ownership, his death defending what they'd built. Roosevelt listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "This is what America should be," he said finally. "Not corporate monopolies or inherited aristocracies, but citizens building together." He turned to Isabel. "Would you consider serving on a national commission for economic reform?" The offer was stunning, a former factory girl advising the president. But Isabel demurred. "My work is here, Mr. President, but perhaps some of our institute graduates could serve." Roosevelt laughed, his famous grin appearing, modest and strategic. "You'd have done well in politics, Mrs. Mercer." "I'm in politics, sir, just not electoral politics." After Roosevelt's departure, his endorsement of the Montana method brought new attention and resources. But it also brought new enemies, those who saw community cooperation as a threat to American individualism. "You're promoting socialism," one newspaper editorial declared. "We're promoting community," Isabel responded in her own editorial. "Individual success within collective support." Isn't that what families are? We've just expanded the definition of family. The philosophical battle played out in practical terms when a new corporation tried to establish a factory in the county, offering jobs but demanding exemptions from local regulations and ownership requirements. The debate was fierce. Jobs were needed, especially for new arrivals. But accepting corporate terms would undermine everything they'd built. The town meeting to decide went late into the night. Finally, young Samuel stood to speak. At 12, he didn't have voting rights, but his words carried weight. "We don't need their factory," he said. "We can build our own. We have the mine profits, we have the workers, we have the knowledge. Why let outsiders own what we create with our hands?" His words sparked the solution. They would build their own factory, cooperatively owned, producing mining equipment initially, but expandable to other products. It would be slower, harder, but it would be theirs. "Your son has your courage," Maggie told Isabel afterward. "And his father's determination," Isabel replied, watching Jonathan organize the planning committee. The factory's groundbreaking became a celebration of how far they'd come. Where once blood had soaked the ground, now foundation stones were laid. Where secrets had festered, transparent planning proceeded. Where individuals had schemed for power, the community built together. But that night, Isabel couldn't sleep. She walked through the house, now expanded to accommodate the Institute's guests, and the constant flow of visitors seeking to understand their experiment. In the study where Catherine had held her at gunpoint, she found an unexpected visitor, Smith, standing in the darkness. "How did you get in?" she asked, surprisingly unafraid. "I have my ways. Don't worry, I'm not here for violence. That was never my style." He moved into the moonlight. "I came to warn you." "About what?" "The syndicate is splitting. Some want to continue containing you economically. Others want more direct action. The faction favoring violence is gaining strength." "Why warn us?" "Because I've watched you for years now, Mrs. Mercer. You've built something I didn't think was possible, prosperity without predation. If you're destroyed, it proves the cynic's right. Some part of me doesn't want that." "Then help us openly." He laughed bitterly. "Too late for that. I've chosen my side and must see it through. But I can give you this. Watch for strangers arriving on the 20th. That's when they plan to move." He disappeared into the night, leaving Isabel with a choice: trust the warning or dismiss it as manipulation. She chose trust but verification, quietly alerting Thomas and organizing discreet surveillance. The 20th brought a group of well-dressed men claiming to be investors interested in the factory. But Maggie recognized one from her Pinkerton days, a hired gun who specialized in industrial sabotage. The confrontation was swift. Thomas arrested them on conspiracy charges, while Daniel prepared the legal case. Under interrogation, they revealed the plan: destroy the factory, blame union agitators, use the chaos to buy up assets and install corporate control. "The old playbook," Daniel said with disgust. "Create crisis, exploit fear, seize power." But knowing the playbook meant they could counter it. They publicized the plot, used it to strengthen community resolve, and turned would-be disaster into determination. The factory opened on schedule, producing its first equipment to cheers from the entire county. But more important than production was what it represented: economic democracy in action, proof that workers could be owners, that cooperation could compete with corporate power. "You've won," Martha told Isabel as they watched the factory's first shift arrive. "The girl who started with nothing has everything." "No," Isabel corrected. "We've won. And we don't have everything. We have enough shared fairly. That's worth more than everything held selfishly." As spring arrived, bringing another wave of settlers and seekers, Isabel stood where she'd stood that first night 12 years ago, looking out at the Montana landscape. But now she wasn't alone. Jonathan beside her, their children playing nearby, the extended family of alliance and community spreading out like roots from a tree. "Any regrets?" Jonathan asked, echoing his question from years before. "None," she answered, and meant it. "Every struggle, every loss, every hard choice led us here." "And where is here exactly?" She considered the question. They stood in a place that had been built on murder and theft, transformed through truth and courage into something approaching justice. They'd turned enemies into allies, poverty into prosperity, isolation into community. They'd proven that the American dream didn't require American nightmares, that success didn't demand others' failure. "Home," she said finally. "We're home." The sound of laughter drew their attention, Samuel teaching younger children the cooperative games they'd developed, where winning meant everyone succeeded together. It was a small thing, just children playing, but it represented everything they'd built and fought for. The next generation won't even understand the old ways, Jonathan observed. Good, Isabel replied. Let them invent newer, better ways. We've shown them change is possible. Now they'll show us changes we can't even imagine. A writer approached. Another crisis. Another opportunity. Another chance to prove that community was stronger than conflict. Isabel didn't know what message the writer carried, what challenge awaited. But she knew they would face it as they'd faced everything else. Together, honestly, courageously. She'd arrived in Montana as a desperate woman fleeing poverty, expecting to marry a poor farmer and live a hard but simple life. Instead, she'd found herself in a crucible that had transformed not just her, but an entire territory. The mail-order bride who'd thought she was marrying beneath her station had instead married into a legacy she'd helped redeem and reshape. The writer arrived with news that would set the next chapter in motion. The government was considering the Montana method as a model for federal policy. Representatives would arrive to study every aspect of their experiment. Success would mean spreading their revolution nationally. Failure would mean being dismissed as an unrepeatable anomaly. Are we ready? Jonathan asked. Isabel looked at the community they'd built. The former enemies working together, the immigrants and natives sharing prosperity, the children growing up free of the hatred that had poisoned previous generations. She thought of Catherine's victims, whose deaths had ultimately led to this transformation. She thought of Margaret, who'd survived to teach resilience. She thought of Patrick O'Brien, whose sacrifice had united them against sabotage. She thought of all the unnamed workers and dreamers who'd chosen cooperation over conflict. We're ready, she said, and knew it was true. They'd been preparing for this moment since that first night when she'd chosen to stay and fight rather than flee. Every choice, every struggle, every small victory had been building toward this. The chance to prove that what they'd done in one small corner of Montana could be done everywhere. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of triumph and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of their resolve and principles. But tonight, Isabel Mercer, former factory girl, former mail-order bride, current architect of revolution, stood surrounded by the family she'd built and the community she'd helped create, knowing that they'd already achieved the impossible. They'd transformed a cursed kingdom into blessed democracy. They'd proven that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they worked together. They'd shown that America's promise didn't belong only to the powerful, but to anyone willing to work, sacrifice, and believe in something better. The writer's message contained one line that would define their future. The president wants to know if the Montana method can save American capitalism from itself. Isabel smiled, thinking of all the impossible things they'd already done. Yes, she said quietly, to the mountains, to the ghosts, to the future waiting to be born. Yes, it can. The story that had begun with a desperate woman stepping off a train would continue with that same woman, transformed by trial and triumph, stepping onto a national stage. But that was tomorrow's chapter. Tonight was for gratitude, for family, for the quiet satisfaction of promises kept and potential fulfilled. Isabel Harrington had thought she was marrying a poor farmer. Isabel Mercer had married history itself, and together with her chosen family, had rewritten it into something worthy of the dreams that had brought her west. The land that had once echoed with gunfire now rang with children's laughter. The house that had harbored secrets now sheltered hope. The woman who'd arrived with nothing now held everything that mattered. Not wealth or power, but purpose, community, and the knowledge that even the darkest past could be transformed into the brightest future. This was her true inheritance, her real dowry, not the money her grandmother had left, not the land they'd fought to keep, but the proof that courage could conquer corruption, that truth could triumph over treachery, that love, in all its forms, could heal even the deepest wounds. As the stars appeared over Montana, each one seemed to tell a story of those who'd died, those who'd survived, those who'd been transformed. And at the center of all these stories stood a mail-order bride who'd expected little and achieved everything, not through violence or deception, but through the revolutionary act of choosing hope over fear, community over isolation, truth over comfortable lies. The end was really just another beginning. But Isabel Mercer had learned that all endings were beginnings in disguise, just as all mail-order brides were revolutionaries waiting to be discovered, and all cursed lands were blessed territories waiting to be redeemed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight brought peace, earned through struggle, sustained by solidarity, and promised to all who would dare to believe that America's future could be better than its past. The Montana method had begun with murder and ended with miracles. But the greatest miracle was the simplest, that ordinary people given the chance would choose extraordinary grace.